What is your age good for, Martha? Stay home, make soup, keep the cat, and stop dreaming about climbing mountains. My husband said it in the middle of our 40th anniversary dinner, his voice edged with mockery, and the whole table laughed. I laughed too, the kind of laugh people use to cover a fresh tear inside. When the guests left, and I was clearing spilled wine and wilted flowers, I found 2 tickets to Santorini in his suit pocket. A pair, one with his name, the other with Aaron's, the young assistant I had always thought was just a coworker. I stood still for a moment, then walked to the desk, opened the laptop, logged into our joint account, and transferred all the money into my name. No tears, no blame. That night I looked at myself in the mirror, smiled for the first time in years, and thought, if he thinks I'm too old to start over, he's about to see the opposite. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Martha Lane, 65 years old, living in Austin, Texas. I never thought I'd be the woman who starts over at this age. I once believed I had a steady marriage 40 years with Douglas, the man I'd loved since I was 25. We met at a church fundraiser. He was magnetic, a smooth talker with a smile that lit up the room. I was a simple elementary school teacher, then brown hair, a crew-neck sweater so shy I blushed when he asked me to dance. 40 years have passed since that dance. We married, bought a small house in the suburbs, and built a life. 2 children, a rose garden out back, and weekend picnics. I thought I was lucky. Douglas could be hot-tempered and a bit arrogant, but he was hard-working and driven. I was content to stand behind him, keep the home fires burning, cook warm dinners, and always have his coat ready when it turned cold. There was one thing I didn't see when people get used to being loved. They start to think that love is permanent. I don't know exactly when Douglas began to change. Maybe after he retired. He had been the CEO of a construction company, admired for being decisive and successful. When the nameplate came off his office door, I thought we would finally have time together. Douglas didn't. He hated quiet. He hated being forgotten. And I, the wife beside him for 4 decades, became a mirror of the thing he feared most: aging. He started spending hours at the gym, chatting with younger friends, complaining that I just stayed in the kitchen and wasn't interested in anything new. At first, I brushed it off. I thought it was a midlife crisis, but his words grew into small, slow, cold cuts. You don't understand business. You don't know anything about luxury travel. Someone your age shouldn't be driving long distances. I smiled, nodded, cleared the table, washed the dishes. Inside, I felt myself shrinking a little each day. And then, that night, our 40th anniversary, I realized my marriage had died. It just hadn't been buried. We held a small dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Douglas wore a deep blue suit with a bow tie, still looking dapper. He was lively, joking, and trotted out fun memories that made me the punchline. Martha didn't know how to open the GPS. She thought Pisa was in Paris. Everyone laughed. I laughed along. In that laughter, I heard the cruelty of a man who once promised to cherish me. When I mentioned my dream of going to Greece, something I'd said for years, he looked at me and said it. What is your age good for, Martha? Stay home, make soup, keep the cat, and stop dreaming about climbing mountains. The table roared. I stayed quiet, forced a smile, and felt something collapse inside. That night, when everyone was gone, the room smelled of old wine and wilted flowers. I cleared the table, wiped the glasses, and picked up a napkin on a chair. 2 papers slid out of his suit pocket. Plane tickets to Santorini. I read, carefully. 2 tickets. One name, Douglas Lane. The other, Aaron Miller. I didn't shake. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a strange stillness, as if the whole world had gone silent, Erin, the young assistant who called me Mrs. Lane with a sweet smile and evasive eyes. I once thought she admired my husband like a mentor. He was taking her to the place I had longed to see. I sat down, laid the tickets on the table, and looked around the home we built. Wedding photos, keepsakes, vases, his framed honors on the wall. Suddenly, all of it felt foreign. I no longer saw a home. I saw the house of a man who once loved me and then forgot I existed. I stood up and went straight to his office, opened the computer, logged into the joint bank account. I'd managed our finances for years. There wasn't a password I didn't know. The balance popped up 6 figures, part from our retirement, part from savings. He assumed I would never touch it. He assumed I would always be reasonable. He was wrong. I moved all the money into my own account, the one he didn't know about. When the screen showed "transaction completed," my heart sped up. Not from fear, from release. No tears. No blame. Only quiet. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Gray hair. Lines around my mouth. Eyes still bright. I put a hand on my chest, listened to my steady heartbeat, and smiled. For the first time in years, I saw a real woman looking back, not someone's shadow. I whispered, "If he thinks I'm too old to start over, he's about to see the opposite." I turned off the light, stepped out, and went to bed in a strange peace. Outside the window, Austin glowed in the night, and for the first time in decades, I felt myself breathing, truly breathing. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I knew one thing for sure. I would never again be the obedient wife he thought he knew. I met Douglas in the spring when I was 25. Austin was proud, still a small city then. Coffee shops smelled of pine, and country songs played on old radios. I had just graduated and was teaching elementary school. He was 27, managing a construction company that was growing fast. He swept in like a gust of wind, engaging, confident eyes, a smile that made you feel special. I remember that church fundraiser he asked me to dance, held my hand firmly, and said, "Your eyes make a man want to stay." I believed that line for half my life. We married 8 months later. A small, simple, warm wedding. I still have the photo, me in lace, Douglas gripping my hand, looking at me like the world was just us two. Back then I thought happiness meant this: build a home with the one you love, buy a house, have children, live quietly to the end. I didn't know happiness often doesn't die from disaster, but from tiny cracks no one notices. The early years were good. Douglas was diligent and ambitious. I backed every planned company, expansion, long business trips. When he traveled, I taught, raised the kids, paid the bills, cooked, kept everything running. I beamed when he took the stage for a state business award, hearing them thank the wife who stands behind him. I used to think that was an honor. But when a man gets used to applause, he forgets who kept the house from collapsing. Douglas changed, not with fights, but with gentle neglect. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing the small things I did to make him happy. Quiet dinners replaced conversations. He came home late, busy on his phone, sometimes greeting me with a nod. I set the table, poured the wine, waited, and told myself this was a tough season at work. Work made him richer and took him further from me. Douglas loved attention. At parties, he talked, joked, and craved admiring eyes. I stood beside him and smiled, the backdrop. When someone called me a lucky woman, he chuckled. "No, I'm the lucky one." I knew it. It wasn't true anymore. It was a line to save face. When the kids grew up and moved out, the house felt too big. I thought we'd finally have time together, travel, garden, read. Douglas couldn't stand the quiet. He needed applause, lights, and new people to prove he was still desirable. After retiring, he joined a golf club, old business groups, and mixers with younger colleagues. I liked mornings in the garden, afternoons cooking, evenings with old movies. Two parallel worlds, no conflict, no connection. I remember asking, "Do you miss sitting on the porch listening to crickets?" He brushed it off. "You still like all that quiet stuff?" "I need something more exciting." I never brought up old times again. Then he started criticizing me. It began as light jokes. "You don't get tech. Let me choose the restaurant. You don't know European food." Those jokes turned into weapons. "You dress like you're 70. Don't try dark lipstick. It doesn't suit you. Who even reads a paper anymore? So outdated." At first I was sad. Then I felt like a stranger in my own house. I tried to fix things, cooked his favorites, went to movies with him, asked about his new friends. He responded with polite indifference, the way you talk to someone you've known too long to care. I still remember my 60th birthday, just the two of us. I cooked, arranged flowers, bought his favorite red wine. As I cut the cake, he took a call. I heard laughter through the glass door. When he came back, he said, "Sorry, a friend wants me for golf this weekend." "No, happy birthday." I stared at the candle burning out. No fight, no tears, just a chill like cold ash. After that I realized, love doesn't vanish in a day. It erodes piece by piece. Each insult, each time he looked at me like an old object, love inside me lost another shard. I clung to habit anyway. People love so long they fear losing it even when it's already dead. When Douglas fully retired, things got worse. He was restless and irritable, complained about everything. Meals, the news, the weather, even me. "You speak too softly. It's tiring," he snapped. "You don't get the times. Don't give advice." I sat with my tea and stayed quiet. I wondered, is silence a way to keep peace? Or a way to bury myself deeper? The answer came slowly. Surely. One morning, I was planting lavender out front. Douglas stepped out and said, "Do you ever think you're wasting your time?" I looked up. Wasting time on what? On things no one cares about. Flowers, baking, books. "Do something practical, Martha." I didn't answer. I smiled and kept packing soil around the roots. In that moment I knew, the man who once loved me for my gentleness now despised it. I kept trying, like many wives do. I thought if I was patient and loving, he'd see it. He didn't. His cruelty wasn't in shouting, it was in not seeing me. Every time he walked past, without turning back, every time he ate without saying thank you, I felt smaller. Our love, if we can call it that, turned into habit. A tired routine, smooth like an old clock that still runs though its hands are rusted. I woke, made coffee. He read the paper. I asked, "Sleep well?" He grunted. I cooked dinner, he ate, and said, "It's fine." The script played on, stale and emotionless. Some nights I woke and looked over. He lay still, breathing heavy, back turned. I realized we were two strangers sharing a house. I stared at the ceiling and asked myself, is this marriage or a cell we choose to live in? Day by day, his cruelty stopped hurting me. It made me tired. Too tired to be sad. I learned to stay quiet, smile at the right time, and avoid conflict. I thought I was preserving happiness, but I was only covering a cold house. Douglas liked to say, "Marriage is stability." In his version of stability, I was part of the furniture, something he assumed would always be there. I once read that a marriage doesn't die from betrayal. It dies when one person stops looking at the other with love. I had seen that in his eyes for a long time, I just refused to admit it. Until that anniversary dinner when he said, "What is your age good for, Martha?" I realized the man across from me wasn't my husband anymore. He was a memory of someone who once loved me. The body belonged to the world out there. So I cleared away the last illusions. No yelling, no blame, no pleading. I simply stepped out of the role I'd played for 40 years. Because sometimes, when love has been dead a long time, silence is the final right. After that night, things changed between us, not with an explosion, but with a long, suffocating hush. Douglas started coming home later than usual. At first, he said he was meeting old friends in investing. I believed him, or pretended to, because believing is easier than facing the truth. The meetings stretched to 10-11 p.m., sometimes later, with a trace of perfume on his collar that wasn't mine. I asked softly, "Who keeps you out this late, Douglas?" He shrugged without looking at me. "Don't start doubting me, okay? Some friends are launching a new project. I'm just advising." I nodded. That night, while putting away his jacket, I found a receipt from an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the place we used to go when we were in love. 2 glasses of wine, 2 entrees, 1 tiramisu. "No, client has dinner like that with a consultant." I folded the receipt and placed it in the wooden nightstand drawer. It was my first saved proof, not to expose him, but to remind myself I wasn't crazy. When a woman lives in lies long enough, she needs evidence to believe her own instincts. In the days that followed, he kept coming home late, still calling them investment meetings. His phone stayed on silent, screen glowing blue while he typed at midnight. I lay, with my back turned, pretending to sleep, listening to the taps and small laughs between stretches of quiet. Sometimes I heard him say into the phone, voice lower than usual, "I miss you." Then silence. Then a long sigh that stung. I didn't ask again. My silence made him comfortable. That's what I realized. Men often mistake a wife's silence for acceptance, not knowing it can be the start of a storm. Then she appeared, Aaron Miller, his former assistant. Young, energetic, soft curls, pink gloss smile. The first time she stopped by with documents, she called me Mrs. Lane with syrupy sweetness and avoided my eyes. Douglas stood beside her, oddly restless. He said quickly, "Aaron just needs to go over something. You don't have to stay up, Martha." I smiled lightly. "I'm making tea. Would you like some?" She shook her head. He added, "No need. It'll just be a minute." They went into his office and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen with the teapot in my hand, heard a small laugh, then a long stretch of silence. When she left, he dodged my eyes and changed the subject. After that, Aaron was around more. Calls, texts, files at odd hours. One morning I heard her voice on the phone, too gentle, too familiar. I didn't say a word. I started writing. I bought a small brown leather notebook and kept it in my nightstand. Every odd thing went in it. Dates, times, the excuses he gave, and the small details, receipts, perfume, hastily deleted messages. I didn't write to accuse. I wrote to remind myself this was really happening. Then one day, checking the bank account, I saw steady weekly withdrawals from our joint fund, the same round number, not small. I didn't ask. I printed the statements and sealed them in an envelope under the leather notebook. He thought I never noticed because for years he handled the big finances. But I paid every bill and balanced every line. I knew where every dollar went. Now I knew this. Douglas was building a different life, one without me. The signs became too clear to ignore. One night after a meeting, I saw a faint lipstick mark on his white shirt collar. He said it was red wine, but I've washed his shirts for 40 years. I know the difference. I didn't get angry. I folded the shirt neatly and put it back in his closet without a word. My calm seemed to embolden him. The house became his hotel. Out early, home late, sometimes not at all. When I asked, he smirked. "Why be suspicious, Martha? I'm busy." "Don't be jealous. You're not young enough to understand business." That line, "You're not young enough," was a dull knife. It didn't slash, it carved. I nodded, turned away, and hid my trembling hands. After that, I woke earlier than usual. When the first light came into the kitchen, I made coffee and sat at the old wooden table with my leather notebook. I reread my entries. Dates, times, places, receipts, transactions, the first small tracks of betrayal, laid out in order. Nothing shocking, just plain truth on a page. I exhaled. Some pain can't cry, it can only be recorded. From then on, I watched him with new eyes. The extra minutes fixing his hair, checking his teeth, spraying cologne, glancing at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I used to know every gesture of this man. Now, each one felt foreign. One afternoon, he fell asleep on the sofa. His phone buzzed non-stop. The screen lit with a text. "Are you asleep? I miss your laugh." I stared at the words, heard my heartbeat, took a photo, and emailed it to myself. Then I put the phone back, as if I'd never touched it. No one teaches you how to handle betrayal at 65. People say keep the peace at this age. What peace is there when the person beside you gives his smile to someone else? I started gathering everything, not to take revenge, but to be ready. Like seeing a storm offshore. You don't scream, you shutter the windows and tie down the roof. I organized documents, statements, contracts, and deeds. Whenever he left, I opened the safe, snapped photos, and put everything back exactly. No one knew. He had no clue. To him, I was still the gentle, dependent wife. I learned to be silent to survive and to plan. One night, on the phone in his office, he chuckled, "She'll never suspect a thing. Don't worry. She trusts me completely." I sat in the dark kitchen and listened to each word like a farewell. Not a farewell to love, a farewell to the naive woman I used to be. After that, I stopped trying to fix anything. I watched, I waited. I let him grow bolder, let him believe I was still a compliant shadow. Each night I added lines to the notebook, taped in receipts, marked the time. Outside, the lavender by the porch began to bloom. I tended it every morning, watching the small purple flowers tremble in the breeze. Strangely, I didn't hurt anymore. Only clarity, cold but clear. I knew that. Soon I wouldn't need to pretend to be calm. The pretense itself would be the perfect cover for a plan he would never see coming. Douglas kept coming and going, smiling as if nothing in the house had changed. He didn't know that in every corner, every notebook line, every printed statement, I was laying the first bricks for what was next, a new life mine without him. The day I found 2 tickets to Santorini, I knew we had reached the point of no return. There was nothing left to save, no reason to wait. All the doubts, the notes in my little notebook, the receipts and screenshot messages, they had all come together into a complete picture. Douglas didn't just betray me emotionally. He betrayed me deliberately by taking another woman to the very place I had dreamed of going with him. I sat on the living room couch, the 2 tickets still on the table, the light from the window making the words Austin, Santorini glint with ridicule. Her name was printed clearly under Passenger 2, Aaron Miller. I read it over and over, as if my mind needed time to carve it into memory one more time to never forget. That evening, Douglas came home late as usual. Seeing me folding laundry on the sofa, he said in a flat voice, "I have to go to Europe for 2 weeks, a few meetings with old partners." I looked up at him and asked softly, "Where in Europe?" He answered without blinking, "Italy, then Greece. I'll be busy, don't wait up." I smiled, a light smile like a breeze, the one he'd known for decades. "Is that so? Remember to bring a coat. Europe is still cold in April." He nodded, perhaps a little surprised that I didn't ask more. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He thought I was still the gentle, gullible wife who would see him off at the door with reminders and a habitual kiss. And I let him think so. 3 days later, Douglas packed his suitcase. He chose new shirts, sprayed extra cologne, checked his passport, tickets, and cash. He gave me a perfunctory kiss before stepping out, that cologne, a scent I had begun to hate, drifting past and disappearing with the slam of the car door. The engine started and faded away. I stood at the window watching, not a tear, not a sigh. What came first wasn't pain, but relief. For years I had lived in a cage made of contempt. And now, with the door open, all I wanted was to take a deep breath and know I was still alive. I went into the office and turned on the computer. The screen lit up, the familiar numbers appeared. I logged into the bank. In the transaction list, I saw recent charges. Gifts, restaurants, hotels, the names hidden beneath codes. Each number felt like a cut. I pressed a few keys, froze all of Douglas's secondary cards, changed the access codes, and moved the money into my own account. In the instant the transfer was confirmed, I felt like I had just taken chains off my wrists. For so many years I managed our family's money but never truly owned it. Today I did not out of greed, but to protect the rest of my life. The next morning I called the bank to block all of Douglas's access. The representative's voice was polite. "Are you sure you want to temporarily lock your husband's secondary account, Mrs. Lane?" I answered calmly. "I'm sure. Very sure." Then I picked up the phone and called an old acquaintance, Mr. Collins, who owned a dealership in South Austin. Douglas's black sports car was his greatest pride. He used to say, "This car makes me feel young again." I smiled at the memory. "Then let's see how he feels when it's gone." I asked Mr. Collins to come see the car that day. When he arrived, I handed over the title all in my name because I had bought it for Douglas's birthday long enough ago that he'd forgotten. "Nice car. Are you sure you want to sell it?" "I'm sure. I need to make room for something new." I said it so evenly that I surprised even myself. Mr. Collins offered a fair price. I signed the paperwork and handed him the keys. As the car rolled out of the gate, the afternoon sun flashed on the paint so brightly I could see my face in it. That face no longer looked afraid, only peaceful. I chose silence in exchange for a clean counterstrike. Do you agree with what I did? If not, how would you do it differently? I truly want to know your answer. I went back inside, poured a cup of chamomile tea, and sat by the window. In my mind, I pictured Douglas walking the cobblestone streets of Santorini, hand in hand with her, believing he'd outsmarted his foolish old wife. He didn't know that every step he took there was a step I used to prepare to leave his life. That afternoon, I called an old friend, Judith, who had worked at a law office. I was direct. "I need a good, discreet divorce attorney." She hesitated, then replied, "I know someone. Catherine Boyd. She's very trustworthy." I wrote down the number and scheduled to meet Catherine the next morning. That night, I opened the desk drawer and took out the brown leather notebook, the place where I had kept all the evidence over time. Restaurant receipts, bank statements, screenshot messages, lipstick on his collar. I arranged them carefully into a folder. As I pulled the zipper closed, it felt like closing a chapter of my life. The next morning, I went to the law office. Catherine Boyd was in her early 50s, with bright eyes and a steady, low voice. I told her everything, from the belittling comments to the proof of betrayal. She listened in silence, occasionally taking notes, never interrupting. When I finished, she simply said, "You've already done the hardest part, Martha. The rest is procedure." Hearing that, my shoulders loosened. Maybe because for the first time in years, someone was on my side. Catherine helped me begin the divorce process quietly. She guided me to separate accounts, list assets, and file with the court. At the right time. I listened, took notes, and followed through. One action at a time, careful, quiet. When I stepped outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of coffee from a nearby shop. I stood on the sidewalk, watching people pass, and realized I wasn't trembling anymore. I was stepping into a new world, one I would steer. 3 days later, when the paperwork was nearly done, I opened the drawer and took out my wedding ring. The worn gold band was engraved, "Forever yours." I held it in my hand, it felt cold. For 40 years I believed that promise so much, I forgot I deserved to be loved as a person. I placed the ring in a wooden box, locked it, and put it in the bottom drawer. Not to keep a memory, but to remind myself that love without respect is only a shadow of the past. In the days that followed, I inventoried every document in the house: the deed, shares, insurance, retirement plans. I photographed each page, saved them to a USB drive, and hid it in an old book Douglas never read. Each action was small, but each one made me feel alive again. I was no longer a passive woman. I was writing my life over. On Saturday afternoon, I sat in the living room as slanting sunlight poured through the window, bathing everything in a honey gold glow. On the table, there were no plane tickets, no papers of his, only a teacup, an open notebook, and the line I'd just written: "When people think you're weak, that's exactly when you're at your strongest." I looked up through the glass. Outside, a light breeze stirred the lavender stems. I smiled. After 40 years of being bound, I finally understood. Freedom isn't running away, it's staying and changing the game. And in that quiet house, for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten, a tremor of happiness. Not the happiness of being loved, but of learning to love myself again. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Thin spring light filtered through the curtains and fell across the wooden table where I had sat so many nights, planning my new life. On the table, next to a steaming cup of chamomile tea, was a white envelope. Inside was the cashier's check I planned to withdraw today. I put on a pale blue blouse and slacks, tied my hair back neatly, and looked in the mirror. No concealer, no trying to look younger. I just wanted to see myself a 65-year-old woman who had lived through enough pain to recognize peace. When I stepped outside, the Texas sky was startlingly blue. A light breeze carried the scent of fresh grass, and for the first time in years, I felt a flutter in my chest. I drove to the bank, a place I'd visited hundreds of times, but today, each step through the glass doors felt like stepping into a new chapter. The teller counter was bright as always, with a hint of coffee in the air. A young teller with her blonde hair tied back looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Lane. How can I help you today?" I answered in a calm but steady voice. "I'd like to withdraw funds from the joint account and open a new account, in my name only." She paused for a beat, then nodded quickly. "Of course. May I see your ID?" I set my ID on the counter. As her pen moved across the form, my eyes fell on the bold words, "Primary account holder, Martha Lane." Just a few words, but they caught in my throat. "How much would you like to withdraw?" she asked, eyes on the screen. I looked directly at her and said gently but firmly, "All of it." She glanced up, a flicker of surprise, then a small smile. "I understand." When the check printed, she set it before me with a silver pen. "Please sign here, Mrs. Lane." I took the pen. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from emotion. I've signed thousands of things in my life: bills, letters, papers on my husband's behalf, but this was the first time I signed purely as myself. No one behind me, no one allowing, no one supervising. When the last stroke closed, I exhaled. It felt like stepping out of a dark room after 40 years. The teller handed me the envelope with the check and a new card, still smelling like fresh plastic. "Congratulations, your account is active. From now on, you have full control." I smiled and took the envelope. Power spread through me, not the power to rule anyone, but the quiet power of freedom. In that moment, I felt myself standing between two worlds. On one side, the woman who endured. On the other, the woman learning to live for herself. Outside, noon sunlight washed the trees, turning the air golden. I stood on the steps and took a deep breath. It wasn't joy or excitement, it was a strange serenity, like when the last storm has passed and the ground is yours again. On the way home, I turned into the mall, a place I rarely visited unless Douglas wanted to buy something. I didn't plan to buy anything, just to walk. But when I passed a boutique window, a dress made me stop. It was a long dress in wine red, a color Douglas used to say older women shouldn't wear. I remembered him saying at a party, "Red is too loud on you. It doesn't suit your age." I hadn't touched red in 20 years. Today, I walked in. The young clerk smiled. "That color looks great on you. Want to try it?" I smiled. "No need to try. I'm sure." The fabric felt smooth in my hands, light yet warm. I brought it to the counter and paid with my new card, the one that said Martha Lane, and no one else. I didn't get in the car right away. I walked along the street, the breeze lifting a few strands of hair, sunlight bouncing off the glass. For a moment, I saw my reflection. Not the 65-year-old woman he called old and outdated, but the 30-year-old I once was, confident, alive, needing no one's permission to feel beautiful. I stopped at a small corner cafe and ordered a cappuccino. By the window, I watched. People pass and ran a hand over the new dress. I felt like I was living for the first time. No longer someone's wife. No longer a shadow behind a man. I was just me, whole, independent, free. On the table was the notebook I still carry out of habit. I opened it and wrote, "Today I was born again." I paused, reread it, and smiled. If anyone asked how I took revenge, I'd say, I didn't need revenge. I just needed to live so well he'd realize what he lost. I sat there a long time, watching the light change on the wall, hearing cups clink, and feeling a quiet, steady heartbeat. A new feeling, not rage, not bitterness, just a silent, powerful rebirth. As afternoon came on, I stepped out, the dress fluttering in the breeze. The road ahead was long and bright, no longer the familiar path back to a house heavy with memories, but a road open to the second half of my life. I knew that from now on my days wouldn't revolve around duties or roles. I would relearn how to love myself, how to savor an unhurried cup of coffee, how to walk without asking permission. When I opened the car door, the last light of day lit the red dress like a small flame. I said softly to myself, sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone else hurt, it's bringing yourself back to life, brighter than ever. As the car rolled forward, I turned up an old song one Douglas used to hate and call corny. I cranked it loud and sang along, my voice rough in the late sun. No one to interrupt, no one to frown. Just me, a 65-year-old woman laughing to herself on the highway, feeling truly free for the first time. On Monday morning, I went to Catherine Boyd's office, the attorney Judith recommended. It was in an old red brick building downtown, tall windows casting soft light onto plants along the hall. The space felt both formal and warm, and I no longer felt like a wife suing her husband, but a woman about to start a new life. Catherine greeted me with a small smile and very bright eyes. She was in her early 50s, short brown hair, confident and sharp. Her handshake was warm and firm. "I'm Catherine. Judith told me a little. Please have a seat." Her office was simple and tidy, a few small paintings on the wall. On her desk, a stack of files, a fountain pen, a steaming cup of coffee. She pulled out a chair, looked straight at me, and said in a low, clear voice, "First, I want to say this. You've already done the hard part. You stepped out. Not everyone can do that after 40 years of marriage." I gave a small, hoarse laugh. "I wouldn't call it brave. Just, I've had enough." Catherine nodded, didn't interrupt. The way she listened made me feel safe, like someone finally understood. I opened my bag and took out the folder I'd prepared. Bank statements, restaurant receipts, screenshots, and printed copies of the 2 Santorini tickets. I laid them out neatly, quietly, like presenting evidence in a case, which it was, except the defendant was the man I'd slept beside half my life. Catherine turned each page, jotting quick notes in red. Her voice stayed calm and decisive. "This is a very solid file, Martha. With this evidence, we can prove infidelity and financial deception. Do you want a contested divorce, or do you prefer to end it quietly?" I looked at her and spoke slowly. "I don't need noise. I just want my share. And my freedom. Then we'll proceed discreetly. I'll draft the petition and file within 2 days. After that, we'll just need signatures. How long until he finds out?" "Once filed, notice will be mailed to his address a few days. He'll be shocked, I'm sure." I pressed my lips together, a mix of bitterness and relief. "He's always thought I'd never dare." Catherine gave a faint, reassuring smile. "Most men like that do. Their biggest mistake is underestimating a woman when..." She's silent. I clenched my hands in my lap. Yes, I had been silent too long, and that silence had made him feel safe. Not anymore. We reviewed the assets. The house, Douglas's shares in his former company, retirement funds, savings. I produced copies of everything I'd prepared. Catherine took careful notes, occasionally looking up to ask small details. Each question pulled me deeper into reality, one I was now ready to face. "I'll need your signature on the formal petition," Catherine said, placing papers before me. "Today is just a preliminary version, but it takes effect once we file." I looked at the page. The bold line at the top read, "Petition for divorce." Years ago, the word alone might have made me shake. Today, my hand was steady. I took a breath, picked up the pen, and signed, "Martha Lane." No tremor. No hesitation. Catherine watched and nodded slowly. "Good. You know, most of my clients cry at this moment. But you're different." I smiled faintly. "I've cried all my tears. Now I just want to live." She smiled back, then said softly, "Douglas will be shocked when he learns what you've done." I lifted my head, voice even. He's always thought I was weak. His biggest mistake. We were quiet for a few seconds. Outside, wind brushed the windows, traffic murmured. In that room, I felt a kind of energy, not loud or fierce, but steady and warm. Maybe it's the strength found in women who endured too long and finally chose to stand up. Catherine gathered the files and looked at me with empathy. "Martha, you remind me of my mother. She lived in her husband's shadow for 30 years, until one day she left with a single suitcase. Signing this paper, sometimes it's the way to begin again." I nodded. "I understand, and I think I've just begun." She stood and offered her hand. "I'm honored to stand with you. Let me handle the legal side. You go live." We shook hands again. Her hand was warm and strong. In that moment, I didn't feel alone anymore. When I stepped out of the building, the Texas sun blazed. Light flashed on the glass so bright I had to squint, but I didn't turn away. I let the sun hit my face, warm and glaring like a baptism in light. I paused on the steps and took a deep breath. The city was still noisy, people still rushing, but for me everything seemed slower. In my hand was a copy of the divorce petition. In my heart was a quiet I had never known. Maybe this is what people mean by freedom, not when you leave, but when you stop being afraid. I walked down to the sidewalk, the red dress fluttering in the wind. Each step felt like breaking another invisible cord that had bound me for 40 years. In the harsh midday sun, I saw my shadow on the pavement, straight, clear, no longer hidden behind anyone else. I thought of Douglas, of the moment he'd open his mailbox and see my name on the petition. Not a reproach, not a plea, just a dry line powerful enough to end everything. I pictured his face, eyes wide, lips pressed, arrogance collapsing in an instant. The thought didn't make me gloat. It made me serene. I smiled and whispered, like a farewell, "This is the first time in my life, Douglas, that I signed my name and it didn't belong to you." Then I turned and walked into the Texas sunlight, feeling it wrap around me like a blessing. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in decades, I know this: I'm not afraid of anything anymore. When Douglas left, the house that had once made me feel suffocated turned quiet in a different way, not the heavy kind of silence, but the clear hush of an early summer morning. No more slamming doors, no more weary sighs, no more voice complaining that the coffee was too strong or the breakfast too bland. Only the wind slipping through the window frame, and my heartbeat, light as a whisper, "You're free now, Martha." At first, that quiet unsettled me. I was used to his footsteps, used to the sound of keys turning in the lock every night. But a few days later, I began to realize that his absence brought back something I had forgotten: space to live for myself. Every morning, I brewed a small pot of coffee, just for me. Not the bitter kind Douglas liked, but something lighter, vanilla coffee, sweet and fragrant. I opened the window to let the early sun pour into the kitchen. The golden light spread across the table, over the white porcelain cup, over my hands. I turned on the old radio. A soft jazz tune rose like a sigh, and I sat there, taking small sips, listening to sparrows outside the porch. Strangely, the things I once thought were small became sacred. I started to tidy the house, not for anyone else, but because I wanted it to reflect who I am. I took down the photos. Douglas had hung portraits of him at award ceremonies, in the office, the kind of pictures he liked because they looked prestigious. I replaced them with old photos. My children when they were little, a beach trip with friends, and a picture of me at 25, messy hair, sand on my face, but a radiant smile. In the afternoon, I went to the garden. The garden Douglas used to call a waste of time. I reclaimed old flower beds and turned the dry soil. At first my hands trembled from being out of practice, but when the smell of fresh earth mixed with lavender, I felt my heart soften. I planted tulips, roses, and a few pots of white daisies. I called that garden my second spring. Then I learned to paint. One afternoon I passed the neighborhood community center and saw a sign, "Beginners Painting Class All Ages." I stood at the door for a long moment, then walked in. The teacher, a woman about 40, greeted me with a smile. "It's been a while since I've seen someone come to class with eyes that eager." I laughed and answered, "Maybe because I forgot I could still start something new." The first time I held a brush, my hand shook, but after a few strokes, I found peace in each line. No one there to say, "That's ugly," no one to tell me I was wasting time. Just colors, canvas, and the steady sound of my own breathing. When I finished the first painting, just a vase on a table, I burst into tears. Not because it was beautiful, but because I felt I had recovered a piece of my soul I'd dropped somewhere in the years of being a dutiful wife. In the late afternoons, I rolled out a yoga mat in the living room. Sunlight stretched across the wood floor, and I followed a video on the screen slowly, breath by breath. At first, my knees creaked, but I was patient. After a few days, I felt more flexible, lighter, and strangest of all, happier. I wasn't exercising to get younger, not to impress anyone, just to feel alive in this body. I started calling old friends. The ones Douglas never liked because they talk too much and are fake. Optimists. I called Helen, my college friend I'd lost touch with for nearly 20 years. She answered, her voice bursting with surprise. "Martha? Is that Martha Lane? I thought you disappeared from the world." I laughed. "No, I was just held hostage for a while. I've been released now." We laughed like two young girls. Helen invited me over for dinner. I brought a bottle of red wine. That night, we talked without stopping. About the old days, about life, about the things no one teaches women they have the right to do. When I told her about the divorce, Helen held my hand, her eyes bright. "I'm proud of you. Not because you left him, but because you chose yourself." Her words left me quiet. That's right. I chose myself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for it. Day by day, I fell in love with peaceful mornings again. I woke early, threw the windows wide open, took a deep breath, and let sunlight and the scent of flowers pour in. I filled the house with music, jazz, country, even old love songs Douglas used to call corny. I played them loud and sang while making coffee. No one frowned. No one said, "Keep it down." Just me and the birds outside weaving a soundtrack for old age. Once, while I was trimming flowers, my neighbor, Betty, who's lived next door for more than 20 years, stopped by. She leaned on the wooden fence and grinned. "You look different, Martha. I've never seen you this happy." I looked up, hands dirty with soil, hair damp with sweat, and smiled softly. "I just learned how to breathe, Betty." She chuckled and teased. "So the secret to happiness is learning how to breathe?" I nodded. "Yeah, I've spent my whole life breathing for other people. Now I finally know what it's like to take a breath just for me." She looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "You make me believe people can start over at any age." After she left, I sat by the flower bed, watching the newly opened tulips. Sunlight lit each bright red petal, and I realized freedom doesn't come from leaving someone. It comes from the moment you stop asking permission to live. In the evening, I opened my journal and wrote a few lines. Freedom isn't loud or performative. It's the coffee you brew yourself, the music you choose, the breeze you let touch your cheek. And when peace returns, you don't want revenge, you just want to thank yourself for not giving up. I set down the pen, closed the notebook, and looked around the house glowing with soft lamplight. For 40 years, I used to fear the dark when Douglas traveled, but now I love it because it's quiet, because it's mine. On the table, the frame I'd just painted was still wet. A woman standing in a garden, arms open to the wind. I looked at it and smiled. Turns out, the woman in the painting was me, the one who just relearned how to breathe, how to live, and how to love her own life. And in that little house in Austin, amid lavender and the sound of insects outside the porch, I knew one thing for sure. Freedom isn't a prize after divorce. It's a life I should have had long ago. That morning, sunlight lay gold across the porch as always. I was putting a few fresh lavender sprigs into a glass vase when the phone rang. The screen showed the name Douglas Lane. A brief stillness swept over me. I looked at that name and felt no stab, just the sense of seeing a stranger I once knew. I picked up. "Hello." His voice came bright and noisy, like he was in the middle of a party. "Martha, everything at home okay? I just wanted to make sure you're all right." I chuckled softly, my tone as light as talking about the weather. "Everything's fine, Douglas. Enjoy your trip." On his end, he laughed loudly. I could hear glasses clinking. Then his voice came mixed with the sound of waves. "You know, this place is stunning. The sea is so blue. The wine is better than I imagined. I'm at a restaurant right on the cliff. The view is all Santorini." I listened, but my mind no longer pictured what he described. Santorini, a place I once dreamed of going with him, was now just the backdrop to betrayal. His voice kept going, excited like a child set free. "People really know how to live here, Martha. They don't care about age. They enjoy every second. You should see the sky. The sunsets are on fire." Suddenly, laughter rang out beside him. A young, clear, sweet voice, and then his tone dropped. "Aaron, don't let me finish this call." A brief silence. I heard wine being poured and waves rolling in steady rhythm. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Everything I needed to know was in those sounds. He cleared his throat and tried to sound normal. I just called to make sure you're doing well." I answered, still calm and even. "I'm well, and you enjoy your vacation. You deserve it." I heard him laugh, a sound at once smug and careless. Then he said, likely not noticing the change in how I addressed him, "I'll bring you a gift, maybe a Greek silk scarf. You like ocean blue, right?" I replied softly, "No need, Douglas. I already have everything I need." A slight hesitation on the line. I imagined him frowning, trying to figure out what sounded different in my voice. But then he chuckled it off. "You're always so modest. Anyway, I've gotta go. See you when I'm back." I just said, "Sure, see you." The call ended. The dial tone clicked. Neat, as a period closing a long, rotten chapter. I set the phone down, sat still for a few seconds, then laughed. Not a bitter laugh, a relieved one, the kind you make when you've slipped out of a dark room and don't carry any resentment with you. I brewed another cup of coffee. The aroma filled the room, mixing with the lavender from the porch. In my mind, I saw Douglas on a Santorini balcony, a glass of wine in hand, the blonde secretary leaning into his shoulder. They probably thought they were living in a romantic movie. And me? I was living a real-life one where I was no longer a supporting character. That afternoon, Catherine called. "Martha, the court has approved the asset filings. We just need a few final signatures and we're done." I went to the office that same day. The room was as bright as the first time, but I felt different, no nerves, no unease. I sat down and read carefully through each page. Every line was a track of the past being unfastened. When Catherine slid the pen toward me, she said softly, "Once you sign here, everything will officially belong to you. The accounts, the house, the shares, all of it." I nodded and picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name in firm, clear strokes. The words Martha Lane stood whole, like a declaration. When I finished, Catherine smiled. "I've seen many people sign in tears, but you're different. You sign like you're opening a new door." I answered, gentle but resolute. "Because that's exactly what it is, Catherine. This door doesn't take me anywhere else. It just leads me back to myself." She nodded, eyes warm. "I hope you sleep well tonight." I smiled, looking out the window where the sunset was spilling over distant rooftops. "I'm sure I will." And I was right. That night, when I got home, the house glowed with soft amber light. I lit a small candle in the kitchen, made a simple vegetable soup, and turned on a favorite song. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, listening to the rain patter on the roof. No phone ringing, no keys turning, only the candle's warmth, the food's aroma, and the peace inside me. By the time I went to bed, the rain had stopped. I lay on my back, stared at the ceiling, and noticed my heartbeat steady, unhurried. For the first time in decades, I truly slept. No dreams, no jolting awake, no lying there, scared of the door opening. In that sleep, I dreamed of the sea, but not Santorini, a Texas beach I used to visit when I was young. I stood alone, barefoot on the sand, waves at my heels, the sky clear and blue. I smiled, looking for no one, needing no one. The next morning, I made coffee, opened the window, and breathed in the cool air. I knew that in Santorini, Douglas was probably sitting on a balcony, glass of wine in hand, thinking he'd reached the peak of freedom. But he didn't know that at that very moment, I, the woman he left behind, was breathing real freedom. And maybe, in that paradise view, when he raised his glass and laughed with Aaron, the wine in it was being poured over the ashes of himself. I smiled, took a sip of coffee, let the warmth move down my throat, and said softly to myself, not with resentment, but with absolute serenity, "Thank you, Douglas. Because of you, I learned what freedom is." That afternoon, the Texas sun burned hot. I sat in the wicker chair by the window, reviewing the final asset agreement Catherine had sent over, each line neat and clear proof of the freedom I'd won with patience. Outside, a taxi stopped at the gate. The jazz track in the room cut off mid-phrase, and I knew the moment had come. Douglas was back. I heard the suitcase rolling over the brick path, the steady tap of leather shoes, then the door swung open hard enough to make the air in the house shiver. He stepped in tanned skin, salt and pepper hair swept back, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sunglasses still hooked there. He stood in the living room, chin lifted like he'd returned from a grand tour, wearing that old arrogance, the look of a man who believed the world would sit still and wait for him. I stayed seated, folded the paper, and said quietly, "Welcome back." He smiled, set down the suitcase, voice a bit condescending. "Yeah, I'm back. Everything all right?" I just shrugged. "All good. Very good." Douglas looked around. His gaze caught the small changes only someone who'd lived here long would notice. The wedding photo gone from the shelf, a landscape painting replaced by my lavender painting, and on the coffee table a travel magazine open to "Women Rebuilding Their Lives After 60. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes, but he shrugged it off. He walked to the window, looked outside, then froze. The driveway was empty. "Where's the car?" he asked, his voice no longer light. I took a slow sip of tea. "Sold." He spun around, his sun-darkened face flushing even redder. "What? What did you do?" I said, "It's sold. Someone offered a good price. I think you'll be pleased." He frowned and stepped closer, his shoes thumping the wood floor. "You had no right." "That car is mine!" I set down the teacup, my voice still calm. "The title's in my name, Douglas. I bought it for your birthday last year, remember? I simply decided to take my gift back, that's all." He was speechless for a few seconds, then inhaled sharply, trying to tamp down his anger. I saw his jaw twitch. "Fine, I won't argue. You still have the secondary card, right? I need to pull some cash." He took out his wallet, grabbed the bank card, and swiped it on the small reader I use for electronic payments. A dry beep. The screen read, "Transaction declined." He tried again. Same result. A third time his hand started to shake. "Why? Why is it declined?" I smiled and tilted my head, maybe because that card no longer works. "I've locked all your access." "What did you do?" His voice dropped, dangerous. I stood and faced him, my tone as even as talking about the weather. "I withdrew the money, all of it. And the divorce petition has been filed." Time seemed to freeze. Douglas stood stiff, eyes wide, disbelief written on his face. He repeated, choking on the words, "You filed for divorce?" I nodded. "Yes." His whole body tensed. Then suddenly he laughed, a harsh sound pushed through clenched teeth. "Martha, you're joking, right? You would dare do that?" I looked at him, my calm gaze slowly snuffing out his laugh. "I'm not joking, Douglas. I'm doing what should have been done long ago." He stepped in close, breathing hard, Greek wine on his breath. "You're not allowed," he growled. "My name is on everything. I supported you for 40 years. I looked straight into his eyes and didn't step back. "Wrong, Douglas. I don't need your permission anymore. And you didn't support me. We built this together. Now I'm only taking back what's mine." His face burned, his eyes a mix of shock and collapse. I saw something break in him, maybe the illusion that I'd always be there, obedient like a piece of furniture. He turned, strode around the room, muttering, "Impossible. Impossible. You don't have the guts. You—" I cut in. soft but clear. "You once said older women shouldn't dream. But I did not of Santorini, of a day I could live without being afraid of you. And today, I woke up." Douglas stopped. For the first time in years, he looked at me without contempt, stunned instead. Maybe for a flicker of a moment, he realized the woman before him was no longer the dutiful wife who bowed to his temper. I calmly picked up the paper and found my place again. "If you're tired, rest. The living room still has space for you to sleep. In the morning, your attorney will receive the papers." "My attorney?" he repeated, voice hoarse. "Yes, because from now on, everything between us goes through attorneys." Douglas looked around the house again, the place that used to be his kingdom. But now, nothing belonged to him. Even the air no longer carried his old scent of control. It held only lavender and the quiet murmur of jazz from the speakers. He clenched his fists, his lips shaking like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Finally, he managed one line, "You'll regret this." I smiled, lifted my head, and said as calmly as a blessing, "No, Douglas. For the first time in my life, I don't regret a thing." I sat back down and kept reading. He stood there, rigid as a statue, then turned, opened the door, and stepped out. The door shut with a hard click. A gust of air slipped in, rustling the newspaper in my hands. I looked out the window and watched his figure fade. A sun-browned man in a dusty white shirt, walking fast like he wanted to run from a place that used to be his. I felt no pity, no glee. Only relief. I took a small sip of warm tea and smiled to myself. Everything Douglas had tried to grip, money, power, control, had evaporated like smoke. And there I was, the woman he'd called weak, sitting in my own home, peaceful, self-possessed, and free. And in that moment I realized no scream is louder than the silence of a woman who has stopped being afraid. Douglas turned back and stopped in the middle of the living room. Light from the doorway fell across his tanned face, but there was nothing radiant in it, only collapse, spiderwebbing under pride. He looked at me, eyes bloodshot, then roared like an animal cornered, "You are nothing without me, Martha." The words slammed into the room, bounced off the walls and thinned into air. I lifted my head and looked straight at him. In that instant, I saw 40 years of my life, dinners I sat through in silence, times he cut me off in front of friends, mornings I woke early to cook while he played golf and called it family burdens. I smiled gently. Not a bitter smile, the smile of someone who finally sees her life clearly. "No, Douglas. Because of you, I was nothing for 40 years. He froze. That sentence made him step back half a pace, as if someone had just slapped his pride. I went on, my voice not loud, but every word landing heavy and solid as stone. "I once believed marriage was about sharing, that I was standing beside a true partner. But all these years, I was the one walking behind you, wiping away your footprints, clearing the road so you could keep going. You didn't see me, because you only looked at yourself." Douglas clenched his fists, trying to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He had never heard me speak this much, and he had never seen me this calm. "You used to say I was old, I was slow, that I didn't understand this world. You laughed when I wanted to take a painting class, when I talked about my little dreams. But you were wrong, Douglas. I'm not slow, I was just exhausted from living at your pace." He panted, staring straight at me. You've changed." I nodded slightly, a brief smile passing like a sliver of sunlight. "It's not that I've changed now. It's that I finally came back to who I really am." The room fell into silence. Only the ticking clock and the clear beat of my heart remained. Douglas bowed his head, both hands braced on the table like a man who had just lost his footing. After a long moment, he looked up, his voice rough. "Do you really think you can live without me?" I looked at him, so calm it surprised even me. "I've been living without you for years, Douglas." I just didn't realize it before. His eyes trembled, as if each thing I said pulled loose another piece of truth he'd tried to cover up. I stepped closer, just enough for him to see my face clearly. No fear, no pleading, only clarity. You said I was too old to begin. You were wrong. I'm only just beginning. The air felt sliced in two. Douglas stood there, breathing hard, his eyes a blur of anger, confusion, and regret, though he'd never admit it. Finally he roared, "I don't need to hear any more." He grabbed his suitcase and yanked it toward the door. The wheels rattled over the wood floor, long and scraping, like the breath of a man who's losing everything. Before stepping out, he turned to look at me, trying to cling to one last scrap of authority. "You'll see. No one will want a woman like you." I answered softly, without anger or bitterness. "Maybe. But I've learned something. I don't need anyone to want me anymore. I just need me to want to live." The door slammed. The hard thud made the teacup on the table quiver. Then, silence. A complete silence. I stood still. My hand rested on my chest, feeling my heart race not from fear, from excitement, from release, from the feeling of someone who has come through a storm and is still standing. I drew a long breath and looked around the room. The house was the same, yet somehow everything was different. No more heavy footsteps, no more breath filling every corner that wasn't mine. Only me, the warmth of tea, and glittering light on the window frame. I walked slowly through each room, brushing my fingers over the table, the picture frames, the half-finished painting. Suddenly everything had a soul, alive as if the house itself was breathing with me after being held down for too long. I opened the window. The wind came in, carrying the scent of lavender. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted across the wooden fence where a few sparrows chirped to one another. I smiled a real smile, unforced, unhidden. I sat at the table and opened my journal. My hand moved slowly, each word appearing clear. Today, Douglas left. I didn't lose a husband. I got myself back. For 40 years, I lived as someone else's shadow. Now I'm standing in my own light. And if anyone asks whether I'm afraid, I'll say yes, I am. But I chose to walk forward even while afraid. And that is what set me free. I set down my pen, closed the journal, and looked around the house once more. Strange how even today's silence felt different, not empty, but peaceful. I made another cup of tea and put on an old jazz record. The soft saxophone drifted through the rooms. I closed my eyes and listened. In my mind, there were no more shouts, no figure blocking the doorway. Just me, my breath, and the steady beat of my heart. I whispered, to myself, or maybe to the sky outside, "At last, I have a life of my own." And in that moment, I knew everything was truly beginning. After Douglas left, the house stayed quiet for an entire morning. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that makes you feel alone, it was the stillness of a new beginning. I made a cup of tea and threw open every window so the breeze could carry the scent of lavender from the yard inside. The morning sun spilled onto the floor like honey, laying a warm light over everything I hadn't fully felt in 4 decades. I decided to repaint the house. The living room walls, once a tired beige, I changed to a pale sea glass green, the color of fresh mornings and calm air. I hired a few young painters to help, and together we moved furniture, laughed, and debated paint. Swatches. When the new coat dried, the room felt entirely different. Brighter, wider, alive. I replaced all the old curtains, those heavy drapes Douglas favored to block the sun with sheer cream panels that let the afternoon breeze move gently through. Then I hung my own paintings on the walls, imperfect, uneven, but born from quiet afternoons at the window, my hand a little unsteady on the brush, and my heart at ease. Each canvas told a small story: a lavender vase, a wooden window frame, or simply the blazing sky I watched every evening. For the first time, this house reflected who I am, not the frame he built to display stability and success. I replanted the back garden. Lavender, white daisies, herbs, and a small row of climbing roses along the fence. Every morning I watered the beds, inhaled the damp soil, and watched the sunlight prickle on the dew. Something in that sight softened my chest, as if nature itself was wrapping me up, saying, "Welcome home, Martha." A few weeks later, I decided to travel. Not with anyone, not waiting for an invitation. Just me and a small suitcase. I chose Colorado, a place I'd dreamed of when I was young, but Douglas always brushed off because the mountains are cold and there's nothing to do. I booked a ticket and rented a little cabin near Estes Park. As the bus climbed the winding pass, I looked through the window. Snow dusted the far peaks, and dark green pines stretched to the horizon. No one beside me, no orders, and for the first time, I felt light all over. I spent mornings walking the lake and afternoons writing on the porch of the wooden cabin. I titled my notebook, "The Age of Freedom." I wrote about small moments: the wind in the treetops, the smell of morning coffee, the feeling of stepping onto a trail littered with dry leaves. The lines weren't fancy or philosophical, just the plain truth of a woman relearning how to love her life. I wrote, "When people say old age is the time to rest, I know they're mistaken. Old age isn't a period at the end of a sentence, it's a chance to rewrite the pages someone else once took from you." One evening, I video called my daughter Emily, who lives in Seattle. When the screen lit up, her mouth fell open, and then she beamed, "Oh my gosh, Mom, you look more radiant than ever. What did you do to your hair?" I laughed and touched my short, newly cut, slightly wavy silver hair glinting under the light. "I just let the old part go. Makes my head feel lighter." "You're really happy." Emily's voice tightened. "I've never seen you like this." I smiled at the camera and said gently, "Maybe because this is the first time I'm living for myself, sweetheart." When I came home from Colorado, the whole neighborhood felt different. Betty, my dear neighbor, hurried over, eyes wide. "Martha, have you heard? Aaron left Douglas." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yep. Word is he lost his board seat, and his investment outfit fell apart. Aaron said they weren't a match, and left with someone else." I just smiled, poured 2 cups of tea, and said softly, "You reap what you sow, Betty." There was no venom in it. I didn't feel glee or anger anymore, only something close to pity, not for him, but for a person who thought power and deceit could replace happiness. After that, I joined Women of Renewal, a community of midlife women in Austin. We met weekly at the community center to share our stories: betrayed wives, widows, women leaving long, heavy marriages. I told my story not to boast about a victory, but to say this: freedom isn't given by others, it's something you choose. At one meeting, a new member, Sarah, in her 50s and still in tears over her broken marriage, asked me, "Mrs. Martha, do you ever regret it? Leaving?" The room went quiet. I looked around and saw their eyes hopeful, afraid. I smiled and tilted my head. "I do. I regret not doing it sooner." The group burst into laughter, and applause filled the room. I laughed too, eyes wet but light. Not because I wanted applause, but because I knew those words were true. I got home at dusk. The sunset poured through the window, bathing the room in a soft amber glow. I poured a small glass of wine and stepped into the backyard. The lavender was in full bloom, the breeze carrying its gentle scent. I sat in the old wooden chair, watched the flowers sway, and added another line to the age of freedom. Freedom doesn't come from leaving someone, it comes when you're brave enough to return to yourself. The wind chime on the porch rang softly. Far off, the neighbors turned on their lights. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the cool air pass over me. 40 years of marriage falling apart didn't break me. It only made me see my worth more clearly. I'm no longer the woman who stirs soup in silence, no longer the shadow in a husband's. I'm Martha Lane, 65, a hobby painter, a gardener, and a woman writing a new chapter of her own. And if someone asks me, do you ever feel lonely? I'll smile, lift my glass toward the flaming sky, and answer, yes, but it's the most beautiful kind of loneliness because it belongs entirely to me. That afternoon, Texas felt as if the whole world were resting after a long journey. I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sun drop behind the old oaks. The last light spread gold across the lavender as it bowed in the breeze. The wind chime tinkled, the smells of soil, flowers, and old wood braided into a familiar song. I realized peace isn't far away, it arrives when you stop chasing it. A light gust swept a few dry leaves across the porch, and in that breeze I heard Douglas's old line echo, "What is your age even good for, Martha? Make soup, keep a cat, don't dream about climbing mountains." I laughed no bitterness, no sting, just a gentle, knowing smile. "What is my age good for?" I whispered into the wind. "To start over. To be free, to love myself." I once thought 65 was the time to shrink, to settle, to count the seasons as flowers bloomed and died. Now I know 65 isn't an ending. It's the opening chapter of a new book, one I get to write, not anyone else. I looked around my home. Everything bore my touch, the paintings I made, the sheer white curtains lifting in the breeze, the plants I tended myself. What used to be his house is now my home. And I've become the woman I once dreamed of, peaceful, not waiting for permission to be happy. I remembered Santorini, the old dream that once brought me to tears. But today, I don't need white and blue roofs on the Mediterranean to feel alive. My peace is an evening cup of hot tea, the violet sweep of lavender beyond the porch, the laughter of the women of renewal on Friday mornings. I don't need to go far. Where I'm sitting is the Santorini of my own heart. Another breeze pulled me back to the present. I picked up The Age of Freedom from the side table, flipped to the last page, and wrote one final line in slow, steady script. I'm not afraid of time anymore. I know that when you dare to live honestly, any age can be the 20s of your soul. I set the pen down and watched the sunset deepen. The light touched my hair and returned a soft silver. I thought of the women listening to my story somewhere out there, maybe in a warm kitchen, maybe in a quiet room at day's end, wondering, is it too late for me to begin again? I wish I could look them in the eyes and say, no, it's never too late. If someone ever told you you're too old to dream, to love, to change, prove them wrong. Sometimes freedom arrives when you stop waiting for rescue and stand up on your own. I took a small sip of tea, the light sweetness spreading across my tongue. In the sky, orange gave way to deep blue, and the first stars began to blink. My heart felt full not because of the past, but because right now, in this moment, I am living for real. Softly, as a closing line to myself, at last, I have a life of my own. No longer somebody's wife, no longer someone's shadow. Just me, Martha Lane, the woman once called, too old to begin, beginning again in the best way I know. I looked to the horizon, then turned to the small camera on the table where I record these little talks. I smiled, my voice slow and warm, like speaking to an old friend. Thank you for listening to my story. I always want to know, where are you listening from? Texas, Florida, or halfway across the ocean? Leave me a comment and tell me. And if this story touched you, if you saw yourself in me, please hit like, subscribe, or share it, so other women can believe it's never too late to choose themselves. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, from Martha Lane. I shut off the camera but stayed put, listening as evening settled in. On the table, a small candle burned quietly, releasing a soft vanilla scent. I watched the flame tremble and smiled, whispering to myself, "That's right. It's never too late." And in that candlelight, I saw clearly the woman I've become, not perfect, not young, but strong, gentle, and free. A woman who knows that sometimes the most beautiful light in life doesn't come from the sun, it comes from the little flame you lit for yourself.
I was sitting in the cardiology waiting room when my phone vibrated. "We're leaving the U.S. tomorrow morning. I sold the lake house and Dad's watch. I need the money. Don't call me anymore." I read the message 3 times. My hands went cold. My heart started racing. The 71-year-old woman reflected in the glass across from me looked like she had just lost another loved one for the second time in less than half a year. I jumped to my feet, dropping my entire folder of medical records. The nurse called my name, but I couldn't hear anything anymore. My daughter had just sold my entire life with a single text message, and in that moment, I decided to do something she would never expect. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Helen Brooks, 71 years old, a widow. I live alone in a small house in northern Seattle, where mornings are often drizzled with rain and the smell of freshly roasted coffee drifts in from the corner cafe through the window. I've lived in this city for more than 40 years, long enough to get used to the rain, long enough to believe that some things in life are solid, that they can't be taken away by a single impulsive decision. Richard, my husband, believed that too. We married very young. 45 years of marriage were not always smooth, but they were 45 years built on trust. Richard was a careful man, worked in finance his entire life, the kind of person who always read every line of fine print before signing anything. I was different. I trusted people. I trusted my husband. I trusted my child. I believed family was the safest place to let your guard down. Richard died 6 months ago on a winter morning so cold it went numb to the bone. The heart attack came too fast. I remember that evening clearly. I sat alone in the living room, the armchair he always used, still holding a trace of his warmth, the heavy metal watch he had worn for decades resting on the table, its hands still moving steadily, as if nothing had changed. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how something so small could measure an entire lifetime. Lauren, our only daughter, stayed with me during the first weeks after the funeral. She came often, cooked, cleaned, asked about my health. I thought that in the greatest loss of my life, at least I still had my child. At least I wouldn't have to face old age alone. Until that message. In the waiting room that day, everything around me continued as usual. An elderly couple whispered about test results. A middle-aged man read the newspaper. The number calling machine beeped steadily, and I sat among them, suddenly feeling like an outsider, as if I had just been pushed out of the world I knew. I bent down to pick up the medical file that had fallen at my feet. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grab the chair to steady myself. The nurse called my name again, her voice slightly raised with concern. I shook my head gently, said I wasn't feeling well, and asked to reschedule. I couldn't lie on the exam table right now. I couldn't let the doctor listen to my heart when I didn't even know whether it was beating from illness or from pain. After leaving the clinic, I sat down on a bench in the hallway, breathing deeply like someone about to faint. I opened the message again, the same lines, no emojis, no apology, no, "I love you, Mom," just a notification. Cold, clean, final. I called Lauren, 1 ring, 2 rings, then voicemail. I called again and again. On the 4th attempt, she picked up, her voice irritated. "Why do you keep calling, Mom?" I swallowed hard. "Lauren, what did you mean in that message? What did you sell? You can't—" Mom, I'm busy. Ethan and I are getting ready to go. Just calm down. Calm down? I heard my own voice crack. That's your parents' house and that watch. You don't need those things anymore, she cut me off. You don't go to the lake much now. The watch just sits in a drawer. You don't even use it. I needed the money urgently, that's all. You can't just do that, I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. That's family property. That's your father's keepsake. There was a very brief pause on the other end. Then Lauren sighed, like someone being patient with a stubborn child. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. You have a house in Seattle now. That's enough. I have to hang up. The taxi's almost here. Lauren, wait. The call ended. I sat there for a long time. People walked past me, but no one saw me. I felt ashamed, not because something private had been exposed, but because of something deeper. The feeling of being pushed aside, of being treated as no longer important. At this age, people fear loneliness. But there is another fear, quieter and deeper, the fear of becoming invisible within your own family. The lake house Lauren mentioned is in eastern Washington, where Richard and I spent almost every summer for 30 years. It wasn't a luxury villa, just a 2-story wooden house overlooking a calm lake, where Richard taught Lauren how to fish, where I planted lavender by the porch, where every evening we drank tea and watched the water change color at sunset. We bought it after 15 years of saving, thinking of it as our shared dream for old age. And the watch. The watch Richard wore from the day Lauren was born. The glass slightly scratched, the metal band worn in places, but he never took it off. Time is the only thing that waits for no one, he used to say. I had thought that after he died, the watch would be passed down to our daughter as a piece of memory, a reminder of the father she once loved so deeply. I left the clinic and drove home in a dazed state. Seattle rain fell steadily on the windshield. Every familiar turn suddenly felt strange. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat down in Richard's armchair, the blanket he used still folded there. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. For the first time since Richard died, I cried out loud, not because I lost my husband, but because I felt discarded by my own daughter, as if all those years of being a wife, a mother, the one who held the family together, could be reduced to a few bank transfers. I thought I had lost everything, the lake house, my husband's keepsake, my savings, and more than anything, I thought I had just lost my only child. But as I stood up to get some water, my eyes landed on the filing cabinet in Richard's office. The cabinet he always kept locked. The cabinet he had once held my hand and said very seriously, "Helen, if anything happens, remember to keep the documents in here safe. Don't give them to anyone, not even Lauren, until you truly need them." At the time, I had just nodded to reassure him. I had never opened the bottom drawer. I had never thought I would need to. Until that night. I stood in front of the filing cabinet for a long time, my hand resting on the cold lock. Part of me still wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that Lauren would call back, apologize, say it was a rushed decision. But another part of me, the part that had lived 71 years, the part that had learned to read dangerous silences in other people's words, whispered that maybe I hadn't lost everything after all, and maybe Richard had seen this long before I ever did. I sat in front of the filing cabinet for a long time that night, but in the end, I didn't open it. Not because I was afraid, but because another memory suddenly flooded back, so vivid it made me lean back in the chair to keep from collapsing. It was the days right after Richard's funeral. I remember that morning clearly. Seattle was gray, the rain light but relentless, the kind that exhausts you more than a downpour. The house, packed with people the day before, suddenly felt unbearably empty. The wreaths were gone. The condolences had been spoken. All that remained was me and an endless silence. Lauren arrived early. She wore a light beige coat, her hair neatly tied back, little makeup on her face, but she looked exhausted. When she stepped inside, she hugged me tightly. It had been a long time since I'd felt that hug, familiar yet distant, warm yet painful. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked softly, full of concern. I nodded, though I was not okay at all. I don't remember what I said during those days. Everything felt like it happened behind a fog. I barely ate, barely slept, and kept forgetting the simplest things. At one point, I stood in the kitchen unable to remember why I had opened the refrigerator. Lauren stayed almost the entire day. She cleaned, gathered papers, sorted mail, sometimes making me a cup of hot tea and placing it in my hands the way Richard used to. Each time, my nose burned with unshed tears. I thought my daughter was stepping in for her father, taking on what he had left behind. That afternoon, as I sat in the armchair staring out the window, Lauren brought me a stack of papers. She placed them neatly on the coffee table and sat across from me, her eyes so gentle that I felt no suspicion at all. "Mom," she said, "I think we should organize the paperwork. Dad is gone and you can't leave things messy like this. These are just some asset management forms, so I can help you handle things and you won't have to worry." I looked at the papers, then at Lauren. In that moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who used to bring her homework to us, eyes full of hope. I didn't ask questions. I didn't have the strength to. "You're doing this for me?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Lauren nodded. "Yes, you just need to sign. It's only a formality. I'll take care of everything." I remember clearly how it felt to hold the pen. My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from exhaustion. Exhaustion from grief, from loss, from thinking. I flipped through a few pages, dense with legal terms that Richard always used to read for me. My head was buzzing. "Are you sure this is okay?" I asked, more out of habit than suspicion. Lauren smiled and placed her hand over mine. "You trust me, right?" I nodded, and I signed. I signed page after page. I don't remember how many signatures, only that every time I put the pen down, I thought of Richard. I thought that if he were alive, he would do this for me. And since he wasn't, I let my daughter do it. In the days that followed, Lauren continued to visit often. She asked what I needed, reminded me to take my medication on time, even stayed overnight a few times because she was worried I'd be lonely. I thought that in this loss, at least I still had my child, until the message in the cardiology waiting room. All the scattered pieces suddenly fit together in a painfully clear way. Those signatures, the stack of papers, the phrase, "just a formality," and now the lake house and Richard's watch being sold, legally. That night, after crying myself dry, I called Lauren again. This time she answered immediately, but her voice was completely different. No gentleness, no concern. "Why are you still calling?" She sighed. "It's all done." "Lauren," I said, forcing my voice steady, "the papers you had me sign after the funeral, what were they?" There was a pause on the other end. Not long, but long enough for me to know I had touched something real. "I told you asset management paperwork," she replied, less patient. "You signed them." "Management or power of attorney?" I asked, my heart pounding so hard I had to sit down on the bed. Lauren didn't answer right away. Then she said casually, as if stating the obvious, "Full power of attorney, otherwise I couldn't do anything." I closed my eyes. A wave of dizziness hit me. "You used that power to sell the house and Dad's watch?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I had the legal right. You signed." I bit my lip. What I felt wasn't just pain, it was humiliation. Humiliation that I had let myself end up here. Humiliation that I had trusted my daughter completely at my weakest moment. "Do you know what state I'm in right now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I just lost your father. I wasn't in my right mind to read those documents." Lauren was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I know you're sad, but that's unrelated. Everyone has to keep living, Mom." That sentence froze me. Not because of what it said, but because of how it was said. This wasn't a daughter comforting her mother. It was a stranger cutting off emotion. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling a vast distance open between Lauren and me, a distance I had never noticed before. When the call ended, I looked around the room. Familiar objects suddenly felt foreign. I realized that Lauren's care after the funeral might not have come purely from love. It might have been part of a plan prepared in advance. The thought made me shudder. I remembered Lauren's eyes when she handed me those papers, the gentle smile, the trusting touch. All of it now replayed in my mind like a carefully staged performance. And I, drowning in grief, had walked onto that stage without knowing it. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of the child I had given birth to, not afraid of further harm that had already happened, but afraid because I realized I no longer knew who my daughter was. The child I once carried, taught to walk and speak, trusted to be my emotional anchor in old age, could calmly take the most precious things from me and call it necessary. I sat in my bedroom for a long time that night, the soft yellow lamp casting light on our wedding photo on the wall. Richard was smiling in the picture, that familiar smile tightening my chest. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" I whispered, as if he could hear me. And for the first time, I began to wonder, if Richard had been so careful his entire life, would he really have left everything in our daughter's hands, based solely on a few signatures from a woman shattered by grief? The next morning, I woke up early despite barely sleeping. Seattle was still gray, misty rain clinging to the front steps. I made a cup of coffee but only managed a few sips before setting it down. One thought filled my mind. I needed to know what I had left, not to plan the future, but to face the truth, no matter how cruel it was. The bank Richard and I had used for decades was less than 10 minutes from my house. I knew the route so well I could drive it without thinking. But that morning, everything felt different. I gripped the steering wheel, my palms damp with sweat, my heart pounding as if each beat dragged a stone behind it. When I stepped into the bank lobby, I caught my reflection in the large glass doors. An old woman, shoulders slightly hunched, dark circles under her eyes, barely resembling the person I was a few months earlier. When Richard was alive, he used to joke that I always stayed calm no matter what happened. At that moment, I couldn't find that calm anywhere. The young teller smiled as I handed over my card and documents, a polite, professional smile. Nothing unusual. I sat down in the chair across from her, resting my hands on the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd like to check the balances on the accounts in my name," I said. She nodded and typed quickly on the keyboard. I watched her fingers move and suddenly felt short of breath. In that moment, I still held onto a thin, fragile hope that Lauren had only taken part of it, that things hadn't gone as far as the worst possibility. The teller stopped typing. The smile on her lips slowed for a beat, then faded into hesitation. She looked up at me and something like sympathy flickered in her eyes. "Mrs. Brooks," she said softly, "the current balance is very low." I swallowed. How low is very low? She turned the screen toward me. I looked at the numbers, my mind going blank. Nearly all of the savings Richard and I had built were gone. Large withdrawals, one after another, only days apart. The name on the transactions, Lauren Brooks. "Is there some kind of mistake?" I asked, even though I knew the question was pointless. She shook her head, her voice still carefully gentle. "All transactions were completed under a valid power of attorney. According to our records, your daughter had full authority to manage your assets." I leaned back in the chair, feeling as if I no longer had the strength to sit upright. "So, there's nothing left?" She looked at me again, this time unable to hide her compassion. "You still have a small amount in your daily checking account, but most of the assets have been transferred out." I don't remember how I said thank you. I only remember standing up, stepping away from the counter, walking past people waiting their turn. Someone looked at me, maybe because I looked so pale. I lowered my head, unable to look back. Outside, the Seattle rain hit my face head on. I stood there for a while, not opening my umbrella, letting the cold drops run down my hair, down my collar. It felt like a punishment, and I didn't avoid it. For the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of being poor. Not because I truly was poor, but because I had been turned into someone with nothing in the middle of my own life. At this age, people talk about rest, about comfort. And there I was, standing in front of the familiar bank, suddenly feeling like an unnecessary burden, an old woman pushed aside when she no longer had any use. I drove home in a numb haze. Every sound around me felt distorted. Traffic lights, car horns, everything blurred past. When I got home, I sat down in Richard's armchair, the same chair I had sat in for so long the night before, and this time, I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands on my knees, staring straight into empty space. Abandoned old age isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with shouting or shoving. It comes quietly, with a text message, a signature, a line of numbers at the bank. And when you realize it, you're standing alone in a familiar room, wondering where you're supposed to go next. That afternoon, I decided to find a lawyer, not because I was sure I would win, but because I couldn't sit still. I searched online and chose a small law office near downtown. The lawyer was young, only a few years into practice, described as handling civil cases and family assets. His office was on the second floor of an old building. The staircase was narrow, the yellow light dim. I climbed each step, feeling as though I were walking backward through my own life, returning to the starting point of helplessness. The young lawyer's name was Mark. He stood up to shake my hand when I entered. He looked very young compared to me, probably around Lauren's age. His eyes were serious, not overly eager, and that made me feel slightly more at ease. I told him everything, from Richard's funeral to the stack of papers Lauren gave me, to the text message in the cardiology waiting room and the cold numbers at the bank. I didn't embellish or hide anything. When I spoke about signing those papers while overwhelmed by grief, my voice grew hoarse, but I didn't stop. Mark listened carefully, sometimes taking notes, sometimes nodding. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "I'll be direct. The documents you signed, if they were indeed a full power of attorney, and if there's no evidence you were coerced or legally incapacitated at the time, then from a legal standpoint, your daughter acted within the law." I closed my eyes. "So, there's nothing I can do?" "It's not that there's nothing," he said cautiously. "We could try to sue, arguing that you signed while under severe emotional distress after the funeral. But suing your own child is extremely difficult. Courts usually require very clear evidence. And even if you won, the process could take many years." Many years. I repeated the phrase in my mind. At 71, many years felt like a luxury I wasn't sure I had. I didn't know how much time remained or whether I had the strength to pursue a long legal battle. "I understand," I said quietly. Mark looked at me with sympathy. "I don't want to give you false hope. I just want you to be prepared." I nodded and stood up. When I stepped out of his office, I felt a deep emptiness. The thin hope I had carried with me there had been worn down to almost nothing. I went down the stairs, each step heavy. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. I stood on the sidewalk watching people pass by. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, something to do, and I didn't know where I was headed. That night, I didn't turn on the living room lights. I sat in the darkness with only the streetlight shining through the window. Despair crept in, slowly but persistently. I thought about how I would live if I truly had nothing left. I thought about bills, medication, the years ahead, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of the future. It was in that moment that one of Richard's words suddenly echoed in my mind, startlingly clear. "My dear," he had once said on an ordinary evening, "never put all your eggs in one basket. Trusting people is good, but you always need an exit." I opened my eyes and looked toward the filing cabinet in Richard's office. Those words, which I once heard without much thought, suddenly carried heavy meaning. Richard wasn't a man who spoke carelessly. If he had told me to keep those documents safe, if he had spoken of an exit, then maybe this wasn't the end. For the first time since leaving the bank, I felt my heart beat differently. No longer panicked, no longer numb. Just a slow, steady rhythm, as if waiting for something to be revealed. I stood up and walked toward the filing cabinet. In my mind, Richard's words continued to echo, like a reminder, like a thin thread pulling me back from the edge of despair. I stood in front of the filing cabinet for a long time, then turned and walked toward the bedroom instead. Not because I had forgotten Richard's words, but because the memory of the envelope he left suddenly became clearer than any document in the cabinet. It was 3 days before Richard died. That afternoon, the weather was unusually sunny. Soft light filtered through the curtains and fell along the edge of the hospital bed where he lay. Richard had grown very thin, his face hollow, but his eyes were strangely clear. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, trying not to think about what both of us were avoiding. Richard softly called my name. When I leaned closer, he pulled a dark brown envelope from under his pillow, thick paper carefully sealed along the edges. He placed it in my hand and held it tighter than necessary, as if afraid I might let go. "Helen," he said slowly, his voice weak but steady, "put this in your jewelry box. Don't let anyone see it." I was surprised. "What is it?" He looked at me for a long time. That look wasn't from someone about to leave, but from someone trying to protect something for the future. "Only open it when things go wrong," he said, "when you feel like you're no longer in control." I was about to ask more, but Richard gently shook his head. "I hope you'll never have to open it." At the time, I thought it was just the over-caution of a man who had spent his life calculating. I nodded, placed the envelope into the old oak jewelry box where I kept my wedding ring, necklaces, the things that carried more emotional value than monetary worth. And then I forgot about it, completely forgot, until now. That night, after remembering Richard's words, I opened the jewelry box. The familiar smell of old wood rose up, carrying decades of memories. Beneath the necklaces and earrings I rarely touched, the envelope was still there, undisturbed, unfaded, as if waiting for me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The seal was still intact. Richard had closed it carefully. In that moment, I felt afraid, not of what was inside, but of the feeling that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. I sat down on the bed, leaned against the headboard, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly organized stack of papers and a handwritten letter. Richard's handwriting, strong, familiar, slightly slanted to the right, the handwriting I had looked at for 45 years. Just seeing it made my chest tighten. I opened the letter first. "My beloved Helen." The first line blurred my vision. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer by your side, and perhaps what I feared has come true. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and kept reading. Richard wrote that, over his lifetime of work, he had learned one thing. Not every risk comes from outside. Some risks live within the family, within relationships that seem the safest. He didn't write much, didn't explain at length, only that he had observed Lauren for many years, and there were things that kept him from feeling completely at ease. "Love for a child is not blind," he wrote. "It must be paired with clarity." A sharp pain pierced my chest, not from being betrayed again, but from realizing Richard had carried this worry alone, without telling me, perhaps afraid I would be hurt, afraid I wouldn't be able to bear it. Richard went on to explain that in his later years, he had quietly prepared another plan, not to hide things from me, but to protect me in the worst-case scenario. He called it Plan B and emphasized that it existed only because he loved me, not because he didn't trust our daughter. I set the letter down for a moment. wiped my tears, and opened the stack of papers beneath it. Lines of text, numbers, and company names appeared before my eyes, so confusing at first that I couldn't grasp them all. But the more I read, the more I understood the scale of what Richard had done. There were property ownership certificates under the name of a limited liability company I had never heard of. There were reports of stocks and bonds invested many years earlier. There were bank statements from 2 different financial institutions, all in my name, but with passwords and access only Richard had known. I sat there for a long time, turning page after page, my heart pounding harder with each line. These weren't small amounts. This was wealth accumulated carefully, invested strategically over many years. Richard had built a financial foundation I had never imagined. I wasn't poor at all. In fact, I was far wealthier than I had ever thought. But what stunned me most wasn't the numbers. It was a separate file, clipped with a metal fastener at the bottom of the stack. On the cover, in Richard's handwriting, were a few simple words: Real Estate Seattle. I opened it, and my heart nearly stopped. They were the ownership documents for the upscale apartment building where Lauren and her husband were living. The address was clear, unmistakable. The legal owner, a company Richard had established years ago. The final beneficiary, me. I had to read it several times before I believed it. Lauren had always told me the apartment was the result of smart investing, that she and her husband had built it on their own. I had believed her. I had been proud of my daughter. I never imagined that Richard, so quietly, had been the one behind it all. I sat motionless, the envelope spread open on the bed, my mind spinning. Every scattered piece suddenly fell into place in a way that was both painful and clarifying. Richard had known. He had seen the signs I ignored. Lauren's impatience when it came to money, how easily she dismissed emotional values. The questions that seemed harmless but always circled assets and ownership. Richard hadn't jumped to conclusions, but he hadn't looked away either. I remembered the rare moments when Richard mentioned Lauren and his voice grew noticeably lower. She's smart, he once said, but sometimes too impatient. At the time, I brushed it off, assuming it was just a generational difference. Now I understood. It was the concern of a father who had seen much farther than I ever did. I picked up the letter again and read the final lines. Helen, if you are reading this far, I hope you won't blame our daughter. And you won't blame yourself either. People only reveal who they truly are when opportunity stands before them. I didn't prepare these things to punish anyone, but to give you a choice. You can take back control of your life, or you can continue to trust if that is what you choose. The decision is yours. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. Tears fell, but this time they were no longer tears of helplessness. They were tears of understanding. Richard didn't leave me just assets. He left me a position, a foundation, a way out when everything collapsed. I looked around the familiar room where I once believed I had lost everything. The darkness was still there, but it no longer pressed down on me. Inside me, another feeling began to take shape. Not anger, not quite resolve, but a cool, steady clarity. I understood that if Richard had gone this far to protect me, then my role was not to fall apart. And if Lauren had chosen her path, then I would have to choose mine. I carefully gathered the documents, slipped them back into the envelope, and returned it to the jewelry box. My hands no longer trembled as they had when I first opened it. My heartbeat was slow, even, certain. That night, I didn't go to sleep right away. I sat by the window, watching the rain begin to fall again on the rooftops of Seattle. And for the first time since receiving that text message in the cardiology waiting room, I no longer felt like someone who had nothing left. Richard had seen through our daughter very early on, and now it was my turn to face that truth head on. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because my mind felt strangely clear. The dizziness and panic of the previous days had receded, replaced by something else, cold, sharp, and solid. I brewed coffee and opened the curtains, letting Seattle's pale gray light flood the room. Everything was the same as before, yet inside me, a new order was forming. I called Daniel Wright that very morning. Daniel had been Richard's personal lawyer for more than 20 years, a man in his early 60s, hair graying early, voice low and unhurried, the kind of person who never spoke more than necessary. Richard trusted him completely. I remembered once joking that if the whole world lied to us, Daniel would be the last person left telling the truth. When I said my name, he was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the line. "Helen," he said finally, his voice lowered, "I suppose you've opened the envelope." I closed my eyes. "You knew?" "I didn't know when," he replied, "but I knew you would call." We arranged to meet at his office that afternoon. I carried the brown envelope with me, placing it carefully in my handbag as if it were something precious. On the way there, I didn't feel the trembling I'd felt going to the bank or the young lawyer's office the day before. This time, I knew where I was going. Daniel's office was in an old building near downtown. Unassuming, no flashy sign. Inside, everything was tidy to the point of simplicity. Daniel stood when I entered and shook my hand firmly. "You look different," he said, meeting my eyes. "I feel it too," I replied, and it wasn't just politeness. I handed him the envelope. Daniel opened it and reviewed each document, each statement, each certificate. He didn't look surprised, only nodded occasionally as if confirming something he had known for a long time. "Everything is legal," he said at last, sliding the papers back toward me. "Richard handled this very carefully. No gaps." "The building where Lauren is living?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Belongs to you," Daniel said firmly, "completely and without dispute." I took a deep breath. Part of me still wasn't used to hearing it spoken aloud. "So, what Lauren did?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced. "Legally speaking, your daughter exploited the power of attorney you signed, but you have the right to revoke that authority at any time, and for the assets beyond her reach, you have full control." I looked down at my hands. They were old, skin-thin, blue veins visible, but I no longer felt they were as weak as before. "I don't want to make a scene," I said. "I don't want loud lawsuits or neighbors gossiping." Daniel gave a faint smile. Richard thought the same way. We agreed almost immediately on one thing: silence. No confrontation, no warnings, no accusations, not yet. Everything would be handled through documents, signatures, and time. Daniel began drafting the necessary paperwork. The first step was revoking the power of attorney I had given Lauren, a concise, clear document that would take effect as soon as it was notarized and delivered to the relevant parties. Daniel assured me Lauren would no longer be able to conduct any transactions on my behalf. Next came transferring full control of all accounts, properties, and investments back into my name, exactly as Richard had arranged. Daniel handled each step quietly and efficiently, leaving no unnecessary trace. All I had to do was sign, and this time I read every line, every word, slowly and fully aware. "There's no need to rush," Daniel said when he saw me pause over a paragraph. "We have time." Strangely, hearing that almost made me smile. For days, I had lived with the feeling of being cornered, as if time were working against me. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was setting the pace. We also prepared a legal notice for Lauren, not a personal letter, not an explanation, just an official document stating that the power of attorney had been revoked and that any further transactions involving my assets were no longer valid. Daniel suggested we not send it immediately. "Let her continue her trip," he said. "The longer, the better." I understood. Lauren was somewhere out there, enjoying the money from selling the lake house, the money from Richard's watch, perhaps sitting on a sunny beach, believing everything was settled. I didn't want to shatter that illusion just yet. Leaving Daniel's office, I felt a strange calm, not triumph, not bitterness, just calm, like straightening a crooked table without anyone noticing, knowing only I could feel it stand firm again. In the days that followed, I continued living as before. I went grocery shopping, greeted neighbors, answered polite questions about how Lauren was doing lately. I smiled and said she was taking a few weeks off to clear her head. No one suspected a thing. I was still Helen Brooks, the quiet widow, living modestly, perhaps a little pitiful in others' eyes. In the evenings, I sat in the living room, turned on Richard's old table lamp, read or listened to the radio. Sometimes I looked at the empty space in the armchair across from me where Richard used to sit, and I silently thanked him, not for the assets, but for the preparation. He hadn't left me defenseless after he was gone. Lauren texted occasionally, not much, just a few short messages, about the trip, the hotel, the new opportunities Ethan was discussing. I replied slowly with neutral sentences, no accusations, no probing questions. I knew every reply reinforced the image Lauren trusted, a mother who had accepted her fate. It was strange how easy it was to play myself, but a weaker, more helpless version, maybe because I had lived in that role for weeks already. Lauren didn't notice the change because it didn't need to be visible. Daniel called regularly to update me. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Accounts secured, assets transferred, documents ready, waiting only for the right moment. "Are you sure you want to wait?" Daniel asked during one call. "We can send the notice at any time." "I'm sure," I said. "I'm not in a hurry." In truth, I was waiting for Lauren to return, not because I wanted to witness my daughter's collapse, but because I believed some lessons can only be learned when someone touches the ground again after flying too high. One night, I stood by the window, watching city lights reflect on rain-slick streets. I thought of the early days of my marriage to Richard, when we had almost nothing except the belief that if we worked hard and lived decently, things would turn out fine. I thought of Lauren as a little girl, holding my hand on the way to school, believing I could fix everything. Now, I wasn't seeking justice through tears. I wasn't begging. I wasn't complaining. I chose the path Richard had left for me, the path of silence, law, and patience. And in that silence, I knew something had begun to shift beneath the surface. That morning, Seattle's sky was a dense gray like frosted glass. I was in the kitchen pouring hot water into the teapot when the doorbell rang. Not the hesitant ring of a delivery person, nor the familiar rhythm of a neighbor. It was urgent, insistent, as if the person outside feared that if they stopped for even a second, their entire world would collapse. I knew immediately who it was. I didn't rush. I set the teapot down, dried my hands with the old cloth Richard used to use, and then walked slowly to the door. In that moment, I realized my heart wasn't racing. No trembling, no nerves, just a strange stillness. When I opened the door, Lauren was standing there. She looked nothing like the travel photos she had sent weeks earlier. Gone was the healthy tan, the confident smile. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair messy, her coat pulled on hastily as if she had rushed out without thinking. In her hands was a crumpled stack of papers. I recognized the legal notice immediately. "Mom!" she panted, her voice breaking. "What is this? What's going on?" I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said gently. "It's cold outside." Lauren walked in but didn't sit down. She stood in the middle of the living room, eyes darting around as if searching for an explanation hidden somewhere on the walls, the shelves, Richard's armchair. A few seconds later, Ethan Miller appeared behind her. Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, his face usually marked by an overconfident ease. But today, that confidence was cracked. His jaw was tight, his eyes darkened when he saw me. "What kind of stunt is this?" Ethan said bluntly, without greeting me. "We just got back and received an eviction notice. Are you out of your mind?" Lauren turned to him. "Ethan, please." Then back to me, her voice breaking. "Mom, say something. This is a misunderstanding, right? That apartment is ours. We bought it. We have the paperwork." I walked over to the sofa and sat down. I gestured for them to sit, but neither did. That was fine. I didn't need them seated to speak. "Lauren," I said calmly, "did you read the notice carefully?" She swallowed. It says the building belongs to you, that our contract is only a limited right of use. That can't be true." Ethan scoffed. "You think you can fool us? Richard was just a banker. Where would he get the money to own an entire building?" I looked at Ethan, really looked at him, for the first time in a long while. "You know," I said evenly, "Richard never liked showing off, and he especially disliked showing anything to people who only see money." Ethan opened his mouth to say something, but I raised a hand. Strangely, he fell silent. I stood up and walked to the wooden cabinet by the window. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a thin folder, copies, not originals. I placed them on the coffee table. "These are the ownership documents for the building," I said. "The company listed is Evergreen Holdings, LLC. That company belonged to Richard." Lauren bent down, trembling as she flipped through the pages. Each line, each seal seemed to drain a little more strength from her body. I watched her shoulders slowly slump. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Dad never told me." "He told me," I replied, "and he knew why." Ethan stepped forward, snatched the papers, skimmed them in panic. "This isn't legal," he said loudly, as if reassuring himself. "We'll sue. We have lawyers." "You're free to," I said. "But Daniel Wright prepared everything. It's all legal. Every transaction, every contract. No loopholes." Lauren let the papers fall onto the table. She looked at me, her eyes filled with both anger and confusion. "So you did all this behind my back?" "Like you did to me?" I asked, without raising my voice, without accusation. The room fell silent. Ethan turned to Lauren as if truly seeing his wife for the first time. "You said she agreed," he snapped. "You said she didn't need those things anymore." Lauren broke down. I thought Mom would understand. She doesn't go to the lake house anymore. The watch just sat in a drawer." "That was my life," I said, my voice lowering for the first time. "And your father's." Lauren collapsed onto the chair, covering her face with her hands. I felt her body shake like a lost child. Ethan, on the other hand, paced the room, furious and restless. "You can't do this," Ethan said. "We just got back. We don't even have stable jobs. Are you really going to throw your daughter out onto the street?" I looked at him, then at Lauren. In that moment, I didn't see enemies. I saw two adults who had grown used to living off what wasn't truly theirs. "Lauren," I said, turning back to my daughter, "I'm not asking you to understand me anymore." She looked up, eyes swollen. "Mom." "I'm not asking you to love me," I continued. "I'm not asking you to remember your father. I'm only saying one thing." I paused, letting each word carry its weight. "You will have to leave." Ethan spun around. "No way!" "Within 30 days, I said clearly, "as stated in the legal notice. No sooner, no later." Lauren shook her head again and again. "Mom, please, I was wrong. I didn't know it would end like this. I just thought—" "You thought about yourself," I said, "not about me." Silence fell again, heavier this time. Lauren looked around the room where she had grown up, where laughter once filled the air, then back at me. Not the mother who always shielded her, but a woman standing firmly on her own feet. Ethan exhaled sharply, as if realizing they had lost everything they thought was secure. He grabbed Lauren's hand. "We're leaving," he said. "We won't let this go." Lauren stood up slowly. Before stepping outside, she turned back to look at me one last time. "Mom, are you really going to do this?" I nodded. "I already have." The door closed. The sound wasn't loud, but it echoed through the house for a long time. I stood still for a moment, one hand resting on the back of the sofa. I felt no victory, no satisfaction, just a marker, a moment I knew would define something. For the first time in my life, I had not bowed my head to the child I gave birth to. Outside, the rain began to fall softly. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself tea. It had cooled slightly, just warm enough. I held the cup with both hands, looking out the window, knowing that everything had moved into a different chapter. After Lauren and Ethan left my house in chaos, the place grew so quiet it felt almost hollow. Not the pleasant kind of quiet, but the kind where you hear every tick of the clock, every gust of wind through the trees outside. I lived in that silence for a few days, not calling Lauren, not answering any of her calls either. Daniel confirmed that all legal procedures were proceeding as planned. No formal appeals had been filed. Ethan had contacted a lawyer, but soon after, everything went quiet. I knew they were panicking. 3 days later, Lauren returned. This time, she came alone. I was in the backyard trimming the lavender. Bushes Richard had planted years ago when I heard a car stop by the gate. I didn't turn around right away. I kept working, slowly, steadily. Only when I heard familiar footsteps on the stone path did I straighten up. Lauren stood there, hands clasped together, shoulders slightly shaking. The tension and anger from before were gone. In their place was a visible exhaustion, as if she had cried so much there were no tears left. "Mom," Lauren said softly, hoarsely, "can I talk to you?" I nodded and gestured for her to come inside. We sat across from each other in the living room, just far enough not to touch, but not so far that we could pretend to be strangers. Lauren lowered her head first. "Ethan. He's not who I thought he was." I didn't respond. "We've been arguing non-stop for days," she continued. "He said this was all your fault, that you were selfish, that you ruined our future." Her voice cracked, but then I realized he was only worried about himself. I looked at her, and for the first time since Richard died, I saw real confusion in Lauren's eyes, not calculation. "He said that if there was no apartment, no money, then he didn't see any reason to stay," Lauren went on, almost whispering. "He packed his things. He left, Mom." I took a deep breath. There was no joy in me, only a dull sadness like seeing a crack I'd known about for a long time finally split wide open. Lauren looked up at me, her eyes red. I was wrong. I trusted him too much. I thought I was building a better life, but really I was just chasing things that didn't belong to me. I stayed silent for a long time. Old images rose in my mind. Lauren at 5 or 6, hair in braids, running toward me after school to show me a crooked drawing. Lauren at 12, sitting on the steps of the lake house, crying because kids had teased her. Lauren at 18, hugging me tightly the day she left for college. I once believed I understood my daughter. Maybe I did, but I hadn't been strict enough. "Lauren," I finally said, my voice slow and clear, "I could make you leave that building in 30 days, as the law allows. I have every right to do that." She nodded slightly, as if she'd already prepared herself for those words. "But I can also choose a different path," I continued. Lauren looked up, a fragile spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "What path, Mom?" I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. "A path with no ease, no luxury, none of the things you're used to." I turned back to her. "I won't give you money. I won't give you a luxury apartment. But I can offer you a simple temporary place to live. A much smaller apartment in an older building. No elevator, no concierge, no amenities." Lauren swallowed. I can accept that." "There's more," I said. "You'll have to support yourself. Get a job. Any honest job. And on top of that," I paused for a moment, "you'll have to do community service, work with people society often forgets, the elderly, the homeless, people who have no one by their side." Lauren froze. "Community service? Your father used to say," I went on, "that people only truly understand their own value when they see the suffering of others. I want you to learn that, not through words, but through experience." Lauren was silent for a long time. I could see the struggle inside her. Finally, she nodded. "If that's what you want, I'll do it." "It's not what I want," I said. It's what you need if you want to stay." Lauren let out a breath, as if a heavy weight had lifted. "What about Ethan?" she asked softly. "Ethan has made his choice," I replied. "I'm not stopping him, and I won't decide that for you." Lauren lowered her head. He said he won't live that way. He said that's not the life he wants." I nodded. "Then he leaves." Lauren closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to go with him." That sentence landed between us, heavy but clear. I looked at her. Not the proud woman who sold her mother's assets, but someone standing at a crossroads, stripped bare and fragile. "You have time to think," I said, "but I won't change the conditions." Lauren stood and stepped toward me. She hesitated for a second, then wrapped her arms around me. The hug was loose, cautious, as if she feared I might push her away. I didn't. I placed my hand on her back, gentle but firm. "I'll stay," Lauren whispered, "alone." When the door closed behind Lauren as she left to pack her things, I sat down, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. Not exhaustion from winning, but from choosing. I had chosen neither cold justice nor total abandonment. I had chosen a harder road for both of us. Outside, the afternoon light settled over the garden. I thought of Richard, of what he might say if he could see me now. Perhaps he wouldn't say much, just smile, as he always did, trusting that I had chosen correctly, not for immediate peace, but for something that might redeem a human being. Lauren moved into the new apartment on a cloudy morning. I didn't go with her, not because I didn't care, but because I knew there are first steps that, if I stand beside her, she'll never truly take. The apartment was in the southern part of the city, in an old 3-story building built in the 1970s. No lobby, no thick carpets or expensive perfume, just a narrow hallway, dim yellow lights, and the harsh clang of metal doors closing. Lauren called me after setting down her single suitcase on the floor. "Mom," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I'm here." "Are you okay?" I asked. There was a very brief silence. No amenities, but okay. I knew that wasn't okay in the way Lauren once understood it, but it was a beginning. Lauren's first days were heavy. She had to learn things she'd never paid attention to before. Taking the right bus, comparing prices at the grocery store, writing down every small expense. I didn't give her money. I only paid the rent for the apartment as agreed. The rest was her responsibility. Lauren found a part-time job at a nearby medical supply store. The work wasn't glamorous, the pay just enough to live on. I didn't ask much. I only heard Daniel mention that Lauren had signed a 6-month employment contract, and that alone was a sign to me. But the real change began when Lauren stepped into the nursing home. St. Margaret's Nursing Home sat on the edge of the city. A low building painted a faded cream, surrounded by a wooden fence and a few old maple trees. I'd been there a few times years earlier, attending small charity events with Richard. I remembered the smell of disinfectant mixed with hot tea and a strange kind of quiet. Not because there were no people, but because there was no one to talk to. Lauren began volunteering 3 days a week, exactly as I'd required. She wasn't given easy tasks. The manager assigned her to daily assistance, pushing wheelchairs, reading letters, sitting and listening to the elderly tell their stories, sometimes just sitting quietly beside them. The first evening after volunteering, Lauren called me. Her voice was hoarse and tired. "Mom," she said, "I didn't think it would be like that." "Like what?" I asked. "The people there." Lauren slowed, searching for words. "They're not poor. They don't go hungry. But they're very lonely." I didn't say anything. I let her continue. "Today, I met an elderly woman," Lauren went on. "She showed me an old silver bracelet. She said it was a birthday gift from her son 15 years ago. She told me her son is very busy, doesn't call often, but she's sure he remembers her." Lauren paused. I could hear her uneven breathing. "Later," she continued. A nurse told me that son moved to another state a long time ago, left no address, never came back. Something in Lauren's voice made me grip the phone tighter, not from pain, but because I knew she was starting to see. In the weeks that followed, Lauren stopped calling me every day. She was busy, tired, but each time she did call, her voice had changed a little, less defensive, less blaming. She told me about Mr. Henry, a former carpenter with no living relatives, about Mrs. Ruth, who sat by the window every afternoon, looking out at the parking lot, waiting for a car that never came, about birthdays celebrated simply with store-bought cake and a few candles, but no family. "Mom," Lauren said during a late call, "I think I came very close to becoming someone who made them sit there." That sentence fell between us, heavy and true. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, watching the drizzle fall on the awning. I thought of myself sitting in the cardiology waiting room, reading the text about selling the house and the watch. I thought of what would have happened if Richard hadn't left that envelope. "I think that realization is a good thing," I finally said. "Seeing it before it's too late." Lauren's awakening didn't come in a dramatic moment. It came slowly, day by day, through repetitive tasks, through old stories told again and again, through eyes filled with hope and then disappointment. She began staying at the nursing home longer than required. No one asked her to. She chose to. Sometimes just to listen to an old song playing from a crackling radio. Sometimes to reread a letter that had already been read hundreds of times. I didn't know these things because Lauren bragged. I knew because one day the facility manager called me. "Mrs. Brooks," she said gently, "I just wanted you to know, your daughter takes this work very seriously. She's not just going through the motions." I thanked her and hung up, my chest filling with a feeling I couldn't quite name. I didn't interfere. I didn't call to advise. I didn't show up unexpectedly. I let Lauren collide with that simple life, with the people society so easily forgets. Some nights, I sat alone in the living room, looking at Richard's empty chair, and wondered, was I being too hard? Was I punishing my child more than necessary? Then I remembered the look in Lauren's eyes when she sold the lake house, so certain without hesitation, and I understood. Some collapses are necessary, not to destroy, but to rebuild from a true foundation. Hope didn't flare brightly inside me. It was small, fragile, like a nightlight in a dark hallway, but it existed, and for a woman my age, that was enough to wait a little longer. I returned to the lake house one misty morning when the water was so still it reflected every slow-moving gray cloud. The narrow road leading in was covered with wet maple leaves, the air mixed with the scent of damp wood and wild grass. I parked the car and sat for a long moment before opening the door, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to hold on to that moment, the moment I knew I had reclaimed what had once been so cruelly taken from me. The house stood there, unchanged in location, but different in feeling. Paint peeled from the porch. A few boards on the railing creaked in the wind. A long scratch marked the front door. Someone must have been in a hurry once. I placed my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The familiar smell rushed toward me. Old wood, paper, black tea Richard loved. I didn't cry. I just stood still, letting each room speak to me in the quiet language of memory. I decided not to sell the house. The decision came quickly. So quickly it surprised even me. Daniel had suggested selling it would be easy, safe, and financially sensible. But I knew that if I sold it, I would be closing, a door I needed to open. I wanted to restore the house, not to return to the past, but to lay a new foundation. I called Lauren that evening. She was silent when I told her I'd taken back the lake house. Then she asked softly, "What are you going to do next, Mom?" "Clean up," I said. "Repair things. If you want, you can come help." Lauren didn't answer right away. It wasn't until the next day that she texted back, "I'll come this weekend." Lauren arrived on Saturday morning wearing an old jacket and worn sneakers. No suitcase, no designer items, just a small backpack. I watched her step out of the car and stand in front of the house, her gaze resting on the shimmering lake. She didn't speak, just let out a long breath, as if setting down something heavy she'd been carrying. We started with small tasks, clearing leaves from the porch, dusting the living room, taking down faded curtains. Lauren wasn't used to physical labor. I saw it immediately as she struggled with the leaf rake, movements awkward, hands reddening from the cold. But she didn't complain. She bit her lip and kept going. At noon, I handed her Richard's old leather gloves. Her fingers paused. "Dad's?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "He used them when fixing the back porch." Lauren put them on and nodded quietly. For the first time, I saw her work without reluctance, without being prompted. We worked side by side, each on our own task, saying little. The sound of sweeping, wood lightly knocking, wind moving through the trees, a slow, steady rhythm. In the days that followed, Lauren came more often, weekends, then some weekday afternoons when she got off work early. She learned how to scrape old paint, mix mortar, replace rotted boards. Some days her hands blistered. I handed her a tube of ointment. She gave a strained smile, said, "It's fine," and kept working. We began talking more, not heavy conversations, but small, scattered ones. I told Lauren about the time Richard and I bought this house when his salary was still low and I worked 2 jobs. Lauren told me about the nursing home, about Mr. Henry who liked staring at the lake in a photo hanging in the hallway, about Mrs. Ruth who asked Lauren to help write a letter that was never sent. At one point, Lauren stopped and looked out at the water. "Mom," she said, "I never thought working like this could make someone feel so at peace." I didn't answer. I just smiled. Our relationship didn't return to what it once was, and I didn't expect it to. But it softened, less sharp, less guarded. Silences no longer worried me. They became comfortable. One afternoon, while we were clearing weeds behind the house, Lauren called me over. "Mom, look at this." At the edge of the property, beyond the maple trees, was a stretch of open land hidden by brush. I vaguely remembered Richard mentioning something about the neighboring plot, but I'd never paid much attention. We walked around, following an old path. The land opened up wider than I expected, flat, facing the lake, usable with a little clearing. I stood there for a long time. The wind stirred. The lake rippled softly. Lauren stood beside me, silent. "Your father once said," I spoke slowly, "that this place could be used to do something meaningful." Lauren turned to look at me. "What is it, Mom?" I didn't answer right away. The idea had been quietly taking shape in me, from the stories Lauren told about the nursing home, from the afternoons we worked side by side, from the sense of calm I felt standing by this lake. "A place for older people," I finally said, "not a nursing home. A small, warm place where they can come to stay, to rest, to look at the water and remember that they are still seen." Lauren's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Yes," I replied. "Not big, not luxurious, just enough for a few people to have a place to sit, windows facing the lake, a small kitchen to cook dinner." Lauren fell silent, then nodded. I think Dad would like that idea." I looked at her and saw that the eagerness for a money-making project was gone, replaced by care and sincerity. "I want to name the place after your father," I said. "Richard." Lauren swallowed. I want to help." We didn't rush. I called Daniel to ask about the legal side. The adjacent land belonged to us legally, just as Richard had arranged. Everything could begin slowly. No promotion, no loud fundraising, just doing things the right way. In the days that followed, we repaired the house while sketching ideas. Lauren took notes, drew simple layouts. I offered practical input, step-free paths, handrails, gentle lighting, things I knew because I was old and because I had seen loneliness up close. One evening, as we sat on the back porch drinking hot tea, Lauren spoke softly. "Mom, if back then you hadn't, If you hadn't been so firm, I don't think I ever would have understood. I looked at the lake growing darker. I didn't do it so you would understand, I said. I did it so you would have a chance to change. Lauren nodded and said nothing more. The project named Richard began that way, not with a groundbreaking ceremony, not with speeches, just with new bricks laid on old ground, with hands once unfamiliar with labor, slowly learning a steady, honest rhythm. And for the first time since the day I read that fateful message, I stood by the lake, looked at the old house coming back to life, and knew this: some things, once lost, never return exactly as they were. But some things, with patience and honesty, return in a better form. The Richard Project began operating in an early autumn. Thin morning mist covered the lake. Sunlight slanted through maple trees, turning color, reflecting off the newly installed windows of the small building behind the house. There was no large sign, no opening ceremony. Just a few wooden chairs on the porch, a gently sloped walkway with no steps, and the smell of toast drifting from the shared kitchen each morning. The first older guests came through St. Margaret's nursing home. They didn't stay long, 1 week, sometimes 2. They came to rest, to look at the water, to sleep without sirens waking them, to have someone sit with them at dinner. I didn't call the place a facility. I called it home. Lauren was there almost every day. She woke up early, took the bus to her part-time job at the medical supply store, then returned to the lake in the afternoon. I saw her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables slowly. Saw her sitting on the porch, listening to an old man tell the same train story from his youth. Saw her making beds, wiping handrails, checking lights. No one told her to. No one took credit. She did it because it needed to be done. One evening, as we reviewed the expense ledger together, Lauren spoke very softly. "Mom, I think I want to study again." I looked up. "Study what?" "I want to study elder care," she said calmly. "Not a short course. I want to do it properly." I didn't ask why. I looked at her, at hands rougher than before, at the way she carefully recorded every small expense, and I nodded. "If you've thought it through." Lauren smiled. It wasn't reckless excitement or hollow confidence. It was steady and grounded. She applied to study again, took a more stable job at a nearby medical center. The pay wasn't high, the hours weren't easy, but Lauren didn't complain. I saw a different Lauren, not because she changed to please me, but because she had found her own rhythm. I didn't need to advise or control. I simply watched from a distance, with a kind of peace I'd never had before. Then Ethan came back. It was a cold afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, the fireplace crackling softly. The doorbell rang, not urgent, not aggressive. I opened the door and saw Ethan standing there, thinner, wearing a dark coat, holding a knit cap. He looked at me awkwardly as if unsure where to stand. "Mrs. Brooks," Ethan said quietly, I'd like to talk." I invited him in, but didn't call Lauren. I knew that if needed, she would come on her own. Ethan sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped. "I came to apologize," he said, "for what I did, for how I spoke, for everything." I looked at him, neither nodding nor shaking my head. "Have you really thought about it?" I asked. Ethan let out a breath. "I've lost a lot," he said, and I realized I always looked for the shortest path. When it collapsed, I didn't know how to stand back up. I didn't comfort him. I didn't accuse him. I only said, "Lauren is on the porch." Ethan stood, hesitated, then went outside. I didn't follow. I stayed by the fire, listening to the wind brush the windows. Some conversations lose all meaning if I intervene. After a while, Lauren came back inside. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. Her calm told me the decision had already been made. "He apologized," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "He wants us to start over." Lauren looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not going back to the old path," she said. "Not because of my mother, not because of this project, but because I'm no longer that person." "I can change," Ethan said. "Maybe," Lauren replied, "but I'm not waiting." The words weren't sharp, just final. Ethan stood there a moment longer, then nodded and left. When the door closed, Lauren stood still. I didn't step toward her. I let her have that moment. That night, Lauren sat beside me by the fire. "You don't need to say anything, Mom," she said. "I'm okay." I nodded. I didn't need to say anything. I knew. The Richard Project found its own rhythm. People came with their stories, then left, leaving behind handwritten notes, quick photos, thank you letters in trembling handwriting. I read every letter and placed them in a small wooden box. Lauren put the box on a shelf beside a framed photo of Richard. Some afternoons I stood on the porch, watching the lake change color with the light, and it felt as if Richard was somewhere nearby, not as a painful memory, but as a quiet presence. In the height of the handrails Lauren adjusted, in the way she softened the lighting, in simple choices done right. Family, I realized, isn't about holding on through money or property. Family is learning to stand beside each other without harm, giving each other the chance to make things right, without promising what can't be kept, respecting each other's choices, even when they differ from what we once dreamed. I no longer call Richard's legacy money. Money comes and goes. His legacy is a standard of decency, responsibility, of preparing for the days when you're no longer here. Lauren lives within that legacy, in her own way, and I, at this age, learned something simple. Some families never return to their old shape, but if they are honest enough, they can be redefined, stronger, and more real. The letter arrived on a quiet morning when the lake lay flat like a mirror and mist clung to the porch railing. I was making tea when Daniel called. His voice was lower than usual, careful as if afraid to disturb something fragile. "Helen," he said, "it's time." I understood immediately, though we had never spoken of it again after Richard died. Richard had a habit of arranging things by timing, as if he believed some doors should only be opened after a person had lived through enough storms to understand what lay behind them. I set the teacup down, looked out at the lake, and felt a familiar steadiness in my chest. Not urgency, not fear, just quiet readiness. That afternoon, Lauren and I sat across from Daniel in his old office. Light streamed through the tall windows, falling across the desk darkened by years. Daniel placed a thick, sealed envelope in front of us. In the corner, Richard's handwriting was clear and steady, just as it had been in life. Richard asked that this be opened when the community project was running steadily, Daniel said, and when both of you were ready. Lauren took a deep breath. I placed my hand over hers and felt the slight tremble. I said nothing. In moments like this, words only dilute meaning. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a neatly arranged set of legal documents. He read the letter first, his voice even, letting each sentence stand on its own. Richard wrote that he didn't want his assets to become a source of division. He wrote that money, if not placed correctly, only magnifies the worst in people. Then he spoke of the community fund, not as a new idea, but as a seed he had planted long ago, waiting for enough light. Under that late will, most of Richard's remaining assets, investments he had kept private, were transferred into a fund for the elderly community. The fund didn't bear his name in any grand way. It had a simple name, like Richard himself, Lakeview Community Trust. Its purpose was clear: short-term housing support, emotional care, and small projects to help older people feel seen and heard. Daniel paused and turned the page. "Richard appointed both of you as trustees," he said, "with the condition that major decisions must be made together." Lauren looked up, eyes wide. What I saw there wasn't excitement, but real concern. Responsibility, when it arrives at the right time, doesn't make people joyful. It makes them quiet. "Your father trusts you," I said softly, not to reassure her, but to name what was present. Lauren swallowed. "I'm afraid I'm not good enough," she said. "I'm afraid I'll get it wrong." Daniel smiled gently. "Richard wrote that he didn't need perfection," he said. "He needed honesty." The meeting ended in silence. On the way home, Lauren and I didn't talk much. Wind moved through the roadside trees, dry leaves rustling under the tires. When we reached the house, Lauren stopped on the porch, watching the lake take on its evening colors. "Mom," she said, if I had received this before everything happened, you would have done things differently," I said without thinking, "but you didn't receive it, and maybe your father knew that." Lauren nodded, eyes moist. "I feel like I'm standing on the foundation of things I once broke." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "What's lost can become a foundation," I said, "if we're willing to learn." In the weeks that followed, we began managing the fund, not with long meetings or flashy plans, but with small, concrete decisions. A grant to install handrails in an elderly person's home, a short lakeside stay for a couple who had lived their whole lives amid city noise. Lauren worked carefully, asking more. Then she spoke, writing more than she promised. I watched her and saw a maturity that needed no proof. Lauren wasn't trying to make me proud. She worked because it was right. Once, when a funding proposal was declined for not meeting the mission, Lauren was quiet all evening. But the next morning, she returned to the file, revised it, and resubmitted it in a better form. I didn't need to remind her. I simply stood nearby. Some nights, alone in the living room, I thought about the months I'd lived with anger. I didn't blame myself. I only realized that resentment, even when justified, is a burden. I began learning to let go, not to forget, but not to let it govern every choice. Letting go didn't make things easier. It made them real. I no longer wished Lauren would become the daughter from my memories. I accepted her as she was, learning, repairing, moving forward step by steady step. Our family isn't perfect. Silences still exist. Some cracks never disappear. But it's real. Real in how we say no when needed. Real in how we stay when things are hard. Real in not using money to cover responsibility. One evening, as Lauren and I hung a small sign in front of the lakeside building, just hours of operation and one line, "You are welcome," Lauren turned to me and smiled. The smile wasn't loud or proud. It was enough. I looked up at the sky, clouds drifting slowly. I thought of Richard, not as a distant figure, but as a living standard, in unglamorous decisions, in patience, in the belief that people can grow better if placed in the right position at the right time. And I understood. The final letter didn't close a story. It opened a way of living, where family isn't measured by what we keep, but by what we dare to give, together, responsibly. Many years have passed since the morning I stood in the cardiology waiting room and read that message. Time hasn't erased the memory, but it's dulled its claws. I'm older now, more gray hair, slower steps, but I don't feel smaller. If anything, something in me has grown steady enough for me to realize this. Peace doesn't come from holding tightly, but from putting things where they belong. I live between two places. In winter months, I stay in the city, in a small apartment overlooking a familiar street where I can walk to the library, the cafe, and the weekend farmers market. The rest of the year, I return to the lake house, where mornings bring thin mist, afternoons spill sunlight across the water, and wind through the maples sounds like an old greeting. I no longer see these places as separate. They are two rhythms of one life. Lauren lives simply. She isn't wealthy, isn't flashy, no longer chasing glittering things. She works steadily, studies when needed, returns to the lake, each weekend to support the project named Richard. I see her on the porch talking with short-term guests, see her adjusting lamps so the light doesn't strain older eyes, see her carefully recording every small expense, every support request. Lauren doesn't work to atone. She works because she understands the value of standing on the side of people. We don't forget the past. We just don't live in it. Some afternoons, while cleaning out old storage, I still come across the box that once held Richard's watch. The watch that was sold, then bought back with trust funds as a way to close the circle. I hold it, and remember the morning I received that message years ago. My hands don't shake anymore. I place the watch back in the box, close the lid, and leave it there, as a reminder, not a wound. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't weakness. It isn't forgetting, and it isn't allowing repetition. Forgiveness is choosing not to let anger decide the future. It's setting clear boundaries and standing firmly within them. If that day I had chosen revenge, chosen to let everything collapse to satisfy pain, I might have won, but I would have lost my daughter forever. I chose the harder road, and because of that, I didn't lose her. On quiet evenings, I open my old phone and reread that message, the short, cold words that once took my breath away. I read them like a folded page in a finished book, not to accuse, not to grieve, just to remember that one decision in one moment can redirect an entire life. I'm grateful to the woman I was that day, the 71-year-old who didn't collapse, who chose law over tears, patience over retaliation. Peace came late, but it came real. It isn't loud. It lives in simple dinners, misty mornings, in Lauren's quiet laugh when an older guest tells an old story. It lives in being able to look at my daughter without apologizing to the past or fearing the future. We walk beside each other, not leaning, not blindly shielding, just close enough not to lose our way. I did not lose my daughter. I found myself again. And if there's anything worth keeping from this story, perhaps it's something very simple. When faced with betrayal, you can still choose humanity. Not to lose, but to win in a way that doesn't leave you empty afterward. Before closing this story, I want to sit with you a little longer, like two people sitting side by side as evening falls, unhurried. If you've walked with me from the very first lines, from the moment a message took my breath away to this late-found peace, I am truly grateful. Not everyone has the patience to listen to a long, slow, thoughtful story like this. Where are you reading this from? A loud city, a quiet town, or somewhere far away? Let me know. Just one line is enough. I've always believed a story is only complete when it reaches a real person, in a real place. If this story stirred a memory, an old pain, or a difficult family decision you once had to make, share it in the comments. You are not alone. Many people here have lived through silent losses just like yours. If you felt accompanied, press like and subscribe. Not for me, but for yourself, so the stories that follow can meet you again, gently and honestly, like this one. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.